Okay, welcome everyone. It is Wednesday, September 8th at 6:33 for our regularly scheduled select board meeting. I apologize for the slight delay. We're testing a new system. We have an owl in the room. So yes, and so my name is Roger Arnold. I'm here at Tracy Hall with Rod Francis, our interim town manager, and Miranda Bergmeyer. And we are joined via Zoom by board members Claudette Brochu, Mary Layton, Robert Gier, and Marcia Calloway. The first item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. And I do have one item that I would like to add at the top of our agenda, and that is an interim town manager contract discussion. And that will take place at the end of our agenda. So that's what I would like to add. So unless other board members have any other additions, I would appreciate a motion to approve the agenda with that addition.
I approve the agenda with the addition of an interim TM contract discussion at the end of our session.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, motion made by Mary, seconded by Ross. Okay, so we now have the approval of the agenda. The next.
We have to vote. Whoa,
thank
vote.
you. Thank you, Mary. Sorry, we're still distracted because we're still figuring some stuff out, but that's okay. So all in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you. I see all in favor. Okay, so the next item on the agenda is the public and the select board comment. So would any member of the public like to make a comment for items that's not on the agenda? I see a lot of parents in the audience, and so out of respect for their time, and just forgive me to make some assumptions, I assume they might be here for agenda item 6, and we're not scheduled to get to that item for another hour. So I want to let folks know that if they would like to speak to the trail and the Mill Pride nature area, out of respect for their time, it's not on our agenda until at least around 7:30. Okay, but we will now take items we will take public comments for items that are not on the agenda. Linda, I see your hand. Go ahead and unmute yourself. Linda, it's *6.
I'm still getting a bit of an echo here. I'm not sure what's going on.
Okay, thank you, Linda. Do other board members, Mary or Claudette, do you still hear an echo? Okay, so some of us are hearing echo, some of us are not hearing an echo. So we're continuing to troubleshoot it, and I hope that it's not too disruptive to you. Linda, can you hear me? Just maybe not perfectly, but can you hear me adequately?
Well, we'll see. It keeps coming. It bounces. I don't know why, but sometimes you're very difficult to hear. But
okay.
Let's try it.
Well, we're conversing now, so that's proof that you can at least hear me a little bit, and we'll continue to try to adjust the settings. Okay, thank you. Andy Shearer, I see your hand up.
Hi, thank you. Andy Shearer, 23 Hazen Street. Just wanted to ask a quick question, if I may. I'm wondering if the board has completed its capital budget planning, and if it has not, I'm wondering where the potential sidewalk funding fits into that capital budget plan. Thank you.
Okay, I'm happy to say that we're discussing, we have an agenda item that's related to this on this agenda. So, but thank you. Linda Cook, I see your hand again. Would you, did I miss your public comment? It's *6, Linda.
You're talking If you're talking to me, you have to lower my hand. I can't lower it.
Okay, I'm happy to lower your hand. It's also *9 to do so, but I will do that, okay? Thank you.
I didn't understand you, but okay.
It's *9 to lower your hand and raise your hand, but I just lowered it for you with thanks. Okay, any other public comment for items not on the agenda? Go ahead, Peter. Or...
Hi, Peter Orner, 6 Moore Lane. It's not clear to me from the agenda, is a sidewalk discussion or walkability on the agenda, or so it's not. I wanted to support Andy's comment about raising the question of whether or not the sidewalk and safety and walkability and completing the loop is part of the capital budget discussions. And if it's out of order to mention it now, that means it's on the agenda, but I'm not seeing it, that's all.
Discussion of budgeting broadly, which may involve capital, is on the agenda. Okay, I know I can't speak to what we might talk about relating to that agenda item. It's proposed as a general discussion. The sidewalk may or may not be part of that general discussion, but the sidewalk is not a standalone agenda item on this agenda.
Okay, so I want to say to support Andy's comment that we would appreciate and love to work with the select board on discussing how we can complete the loop with the state support and keep this very important issue alive because the town wants it and we've been working on this for 3 years. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other public comments for items not on the agenda? I'm just going to, by way of select board comment, I want to just introduce our new finance director, Fielding, who I just pinned to your screen. And so perhaps we can, Fielding, perhaps you can say hello and maybe let us know a little bit about how your first 2 days have gone. How's that?
Thanks, Roger. I really appreciate it. My name's Fielding Essensa. I'm the new finance director for the town of Norwich. Just got back to the area. I grew up in Exeter, New Hampshire, so a little bit down the road. My wife is going to be the new assistant GM for the Dartmouth Skiway. We had been living in Jackson, Wyoming for the past 14 or so years. And very excited to be back to the area. I've been working in accounting both in public and private settings for my entire career. Started in the private sector and most recently was the accounting specialist for the largest parks and recreation department in the state of Wyoming for Jackson. So the first couple of days have been going really great. Rod and Becky have been giving me a whirlwind tour of everything and just trying to be a sponge and soak up everything I can. And yeah, it's been very exciting and I'm very happy to be here. So I want to thank all of you for giving me that opportunity. And I hope I can live up to the lofty expectations you guys have. And just really excited to be a part of the team.
Yes, I think I speak for all of us when I say that we're very excited to have you on board. And
Thank you.
People welcoming you in the chat. So there you go.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so thank you, Fielding. All right, any other select board comments or public comments before we move on? All right, so the next item on the agenda is the consent agenda. Okay, so when we make a motion to approve the consent agenda, we receive correspondence, we approve the AP warrants, and we approve the meeting minutes for 8/25. So before I take and it's our practice to, if we would like to discuss anything at length, to have a separate motion to pull those items. The one thing I will say is for this consent agenda, there was a request to have me sign on the board's behalf for this one, because our typical practice has been to through an Adobe signature process to have us all sign. That is not available to us at this moment as we make a transition to sort of new procedures. So I ask that as an ask that I sign on behalf of the warrants on behalf of the group. Okay, but before that, would we like to pull? And so perhaps we should treat the warrants separately. Would you advise that? So yeah, okay.
You can do that, yes.
Okay. So let's go ahead, Marcia. You're muted.
Can you explain again what's happened, why there's a difference and we're not all to sign the AP warrant? Is that what you said?
Yes, so the request was that the board authorized me to sign on behalf of the body because typically an e-signature process is made available to the board the following morning, right? So you all know that through Adobe, you have, you sign, right? And so this was a process that Herb had instituted. We don't necessarily have that process worked out yet in the transition. So we could do people can arrange to sign tomorrow, but I think the treasurer may appreciate something more expedient. So it's an option, it's a request.
So in other words, this was a function that Herb had worked out on his computer and it hasn't been duplicated by someone else?
Yes. But would you like Rob to offer an explanation? It was a request from him.
Sorry,
Request from the-
that was garbled, I'm sorry.
Hear that either.
So yes, to answer your question simply, Marcia, the answer is yes. Okay,
Hey, Roger, can I say something real quick?
sure, Becky.
Becky. So the way the AP warrants work in regards to the treasurer signing them, once the board approves the warrants, the checks are signed. That's not held up because of the way the signatures were obtained in the past. So the warrant does get assigned, but you all approve it right there at the board meeting.
Right.
And the treasurer knows that it's approved, so there is no holdup in that. What's important on my side is to make sure that, either the board approves Roger to sign it, or everybody comes in at a certain specific time tomorrow or within the next day to sign it in person until we can get the sign figured out and worked out for the next time.
Go ahead, Mary.
Just, is it likely that it would be convenient to work this out within the next couple of weeks before the next warrant is due? Or is it impossible?
Yes. We can resume that process that we've grown accustomed to in the next few weeks. I think Marcia said, is this a function of a procedure that Herb set up that is no longer available to us at the current moment? The answer is yes. It will be soon, but it just isn't for this period. So that's why I can just sign it since I'm physically here and we can be done.
Right.
Or
But I asked Roger, within the next 2 weeks, is it more likely that you need more wiggle room, that it would, within a month, like 2 meetings, to be really nailed down? I don't know, I'm just asking.
I think it should be resolved in the next 2 weeks. I
Okay,
think that's fair. A lot of saying yes. I don't know if the owl made it to him. Let me pen CATV. Go ahead, Claudia. Do you have a motion perhaps?
I do have a motion, but I just wanted to point out to the rest of the board that this is not an unusual process. This has been done in the past, both when we had AP warrants that came off cycle for our meetings a few years ago. And also when we first went to remote meetings with COVID, I was granted the authority with, I think it was both Roger and I were granted the authority, one or the other of us would sign the warrant.
Okay,
to avoid
Yeah.
all of us having to physically get into the space.
be there, yes.
Thank you, Claudette, for that explanation. But yeah,
So in saying that, I move that we approve having the chair sign the AP warrants for this cycle.
I second.
Any further discussion on that? Yes.
Just quickly, Cheryl Lindbergh, 59 Potts Road. I know that in your first meeting of your organizational select board meeting, you also authorized this
Yeah, I'm authorized to sign the payroll.
for the vice
Right,
chair.
right, so, yes, I know. Okay, so I'm gonna call the question. All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you. So, yeah, okay, so.
I move to approve,
Now,
I move to approve the AP warrant.
okay, is there a second?
I'll second.
Second.
Okay, Mary seconded, okay, any further discussion on the AP warrant? Okay, all in favor, please raise your hand. Okay. I'm not seeing unanimous hands, so I'm gonna roll call. Claudette, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mary, how do you vote?
I vote yes.
Rob, how do you vote?
Yes.
Marcia, how do you vote?
Abstain.
And I'm a yes. Okay. All right, so we approved the warrants. Now, we need to approve the meeting minutes. We've ceased to have a consent agenda, it seems. Now we have to approve the correspondence and the meeting minutes. Is there a motion?
I
Go ahead,
move
Mary.
that, I move that we accept correspondence and the meeting minutes.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, seconded by Rob, made by Mary. Any further discussion? Go ahead, Marcia.
As to the minutes, I made a correction. I sent it to Miranda today. It's paragraph 9, and it should read in the center of it. Callaway said she thinks the select board should follow the requirements of 24 VSA section 1233, which says a manager shall be selected with special reference to his or her education, training, and experience to perform the duties of such office, and noted the VLCT recommendation to also do a credit check on any candidate. And then later, there's a typo. It says Leighton said she doesn't feel the need to look at Francis's CV or run. It says ruin. It should be run, I believe, a credit check.
Yes, that's an important. Okay. So Marcia, would you like to make a friendly amendment to the meeting minutes, or would you like, or is there more to discuss? We have a motion on the table that is approving the correspondence and the meeting minutes. So is there any further discussion on that? Go ahead. Go ahead.
I also wanted to bring forward some of the correspondence.
Okay, why don't we discuss the correspondence? Because right now we have a motion on the table to approve the correspondence meeting. So let's just have please have a discussion on the correspondence. Go ahead.
Okay. The Rosamond Orford letter regarding the siting. I'd like the minutes to reflect that Rosamond might call the PUC clerk. There is something called the Queechy test in the PUC rules 5.105, sorry, 5.112A, which says that the PUC will determine whether a project would have an adverse impact on the aesthetics. And then there are 2 questions that follow, and one of them is, would the project violate a clear written community standard? So if Rosamond has a question, I think that this is indicating that facilities up to 15 kilowatts are handled by the PUC, and aesthetics is an issue, and the town is not necessarily overrun by the state, but that should come from the clerk of the commission. And so I just wanted that in the minutes so that she would understand that.
Yes. Thank you, Marcia. We have our clerk has taken that down.
And then the Garrett Palm correspondence about Velco. I was wondering if it would be possible to ask the DPW to contact Velco for more information and ask about, you know, for an explanation to be posted on the listserv so that people aren't left wondering what's going on.
May I suggest that we have the town manager's office find the information and reach out to Garrett directly? But otherwise, I think that would be my suggestion. I don't know if you agree with that suggestion.
Someone needs to contact Velco, I think, and get an explanation and tell people.
Yes, and we don't necessarily know if our town manager's office doesn't have an explanation. So I'm looking at Miranda and Rod now. Would you like to hear a possible explanation? Or would you just like to direct them to provide one to the correspondent?
I think Mr. Palm is looking for something, so that I'm just trying to help him.
That's great. So why don't we, in the interest of time, I see Rod and Miranda indicating that they have some answers. So let the minutes reflect that the town manager's office will respond with information to Mr. Palm. How's that? Is that adequate? I'm just trying to help.
Yeah, it was on the listserv in the first instance, and so it might be that other people are interested. The listserv is there to serve.
Okay, that's great. And then, okay, so you made some notes for the minutes, and I think that's really wonderfully helpful for the discussion. So is there can I call the question for the approval, or actually we need a friendly amendment? Because Marcia, you had some corrections to the meeting minutes. So perhaps there's someone who could approve your friendly amendment.
I move to approve Marcia's friendly amendment.
The friendly amendment was the correction sent to Miranda's office be reflected in the meeting minutes is the friendly amendment.
So moved.
Perhaps, okay. So I'm going to say amendment request made by Marcia, seconded by Mary. And then we should vote on that friendly amendment, I believe. I'm looking at Miranda to make sure that that was what the record says.
So Leighton made the original
Okay, so I need a
motion,
second.
and Leighton just amended it,
Okay,
right?
yeah.
So I think Gear just needs to second the amendment.
That's right.
Yes?
Right,
Thank you.
Then
and he
you can vote.
does.
Okay.
And so I
I
think
will second.
We have an amendment within a motion to approve the meeting minutes. And so, okay, so now we need to vote on the correction, the friendly amendment.
The whole thing,
The whole
because it's
thing.
all now.
It's all
right
right.
up one thing.
Great.
Yep.
Thank you. We're going to cease to have a consent agenda, basically. Okay, so can we all in favor of approving accepting the correspondence and approving the meeting minutes as amended by Marcia? Please raise your hand. Great, thank you. Okay. Thank you. I really appreciate everyone's patience as we deal with the procedural matters. Okay, so our next item on the agenda is a presentation and discussion with VLCT regarding the recruitment of our town manager. And so the next town manager. So I have some folks from VLCT here. I'm going to try to add him to the pin. I don't know why it's not allowing. Okay, so Rick McGuire from VLCT here is here, and he is he's a consultant that works with VLCT on executive recruiting, and I was trying to pin him to just so we can see him, but I think I need to not allowing me to do that. But I believe that Rick will probably go straight into a presentation. So Rick, why don't you go ahead and say hello and do that for us?
Okay, thank you, Roger, and greetings to all of you on the screen here. As Roger said, I'm an executive search consultant for the Vermont League of Cities and Towns. In my previous life, I'm retired now. I served as town manager for the town of Williston for about 22 years. And I have a long history of working in local government before that as well. And I want to thank you all for the opportunity to talk about our proposal for you. And I do have like a Prezi type presentation or PowerPoint, either one, which I can switch to in a minute. But actually, maybe I'll put that up now and I can keep talking. Let's see. I got to make sure I get this right here.
And I should say while you're doing that, Rick, that Abby Friedman from the LCT is also here with us. And so while Rick is the sort of the consultant who we mostly working with on this executive search, Abby is obviously here as our connection to VLCT and can speak to sort of past searches and VLCT's involvement. And so following a little bit of a presentation, they'll take our questions.
Okay, I'm ready to go here, so I'm going to put it up on my screen here and share it. So I want to talk about the process, and if I can suggest that if anyone has any questions as I go through this, that might be more productive because we can address the questions right away. So the process of looking for a new town manager can be a long process, and the image on your screen shows a long road, and so I'm going to probably abuse that metaphor as we move forward here. It's a process where we are, as the Vermont League of Cities and Towns, and me in particular, are going to help you to navigate this road. And I want to make sure that you don't make any wrong turns along the way and that you arrive at your destination happy. And I also want to say that finding a good match for the town of Norwich is really a two-way street. The town obviously wants to find someone that has the skills and personality that fits well with your community. But also the candidate you select, we have to make sure that Norwich is a good fit for that person as well. Because you can find what you think is the best person, and if they're not happy with their work, then they're not going to last very long. So that's why it's important to provide quite a bit of information during the recruitment process so that the candidates can learn about Norwich as well as you learning about the candidates. Our goal in this process is to be as transparent as possible. We also can, if you so choose, involve a number of different individuals within your organization. And through this process, we'll help educate the candidates, at the same time educating you about the various candidates. And we can also tailor our program or process to meet your needs if you have very specific needs. So I'm going to talk about some of the steps here in the process. And let's see, I'll advance the slide here. There we go. So I already talked about the road ahead. So the step number one is an important step. And on the bottom here, I say it takes 1 to 2 weeks. That really is almost too short a time because this is a period of reflection. You need to, and with our help, look at the job description, make sure it's accurate and meets the needs for the board. You have to take a look at the pay range. And then we also like to develop what I call position profile. And this profile talks about the community and describes the community. And we also talk about the kinds of specific skills and maybe traits that the board is looking for in a new manager. And one of the steps in doing that is for me to do interviews of all the select board members and any other key members of the community that you feel that might be helpful in preparing that information for the candidates. I also find it useful to include information about the schedule, the recruitment schedule, and information about the benefits, the major benefits that the community offers. So those are important pieces, and this is information that's good to have before you even take your first step. However, if you're in a compressed schedule, and I think Norwich probably does fit that category, we can get that part of this process started, and while we're starting the next step. So I'm gonna, and of course, the other piece of this is confidentiality. For the candidates, this is an important piece, because you may have candidates who are currently employed and they don't want to jeopardize their current employment with the community. And so confidentiality is kind of built into our process for that reason. The second step in our process is to begin the recruitment process, and that's placement of ads. And we will work with you in that to identify the areas that you think make sense to advertise in. And one big question I often get is, should we advertise with the International City County Management Association newsletter? And you know, I think my recommendation is going to be yes, but and I would say too that because I am a lifelong member of that association, I have a lifetime membership. I get a significantly reduced fee for placing the ad, so I would save you some money because of that. And then once the applications start rolling in, and by the way, we do this all remotely. In other words, people would submit their resumes via email. I would receive each one and acknowledge the receipt of each of these so that each applicant understands right away where they stand in the process. And as we begin to, in the future steps, I'll talk about this, but as we begin to shorten the list, I will continue to notify the applicants so they are aware whether they're still being considered or not. One thing that we might.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I don't know if it's appropriate. Marcia, I saw had a hand up. So I know you said you'll take questions as we go, so I wanted to have her ask her question.
Sure.
Thank you, Roger. You said an international newsletter, so I'm confused why.
Well, it's an organization that most town and city managers across the country are members of. And so if you're, let's say, a town manager in Maine or any other state in the country, if you're looking for a job, that's the first place you're going to look. And it does serve international, but Canada has a number of members, Australia, countries from all around the world, but primarily it's an organization serving managers throughout this country. And so that's why I think it's an important piece for advertising. Does that answer your question?
It does,
Okay.
thanks.
Okay. Yeah, and Roger, if you can let me know if anyone else has a question as we go through, because I'm going to be looking at my notes and the screen, and so I won't necessarily see everyone with questions.
Board members, feel free for this to unmute yourselves and jump in if you have questions. So thank you.
All right, so I'm going to move on to the next step then. And so this is the point where we start to narrow the field. And one question I often get is how many applicants can we expect? And I have no idea. I can tell you when we advertised recently for the town of Jericho, we received 22 applications. That was for a town administrator position though, and I would expect that we would get more than that for a town manager position. And so how much more, I have no way of knowing, but you know, I think we could easily receive more than 22. And one part of the process that I think we might want to try, which we can include in the profile, is to actually set the date for the first round of interviews right away and advertise that right away. So as people are submitting the applications, they know when the first round of interviews is. That saves a lot of time because I've experienced a fair amount of delays trying to coordinate people's schedules, and so it's just easier if we can agree on a specific date ahead of time, and then schedule those interviews for that date. So and this step, you often select boards will want to set up a committee to do this. You don't have to, but you certainly can. And you can include any number of different types of people. You can include select board members, employees, members of the community, perhaps professionals in the field. There's a wide range of different options for you in this. And we can talk about that if we're selected to do the work as to who you would like on this committee. But the function of this committee is really twofold. One is to review the resumes. And if you like, we can help a little bit. Let's say we get 40 applications. I can do a quick review and maybe eliminate the low-hanging fruit, so to speak, and reduce the number to a more manageable number, say if we want to interview 8 people, for example, I can reduce it to maybe 20 or 15, whatever. And then this committee can review those resumes and further narrow it down to anywhere from 6 to 10. I think 8 is probably the upper limit of how many you're going to want to interview, because each interview you can figure on taking about an hour, 45 minutes for the actual interview, and then 15 minutes in between just to catch your breath. And that, of course, is the next step in this is actually doing the interviews. And that's a step where we're actually there. I'll be there to kind of walk you through it, review the questions you might come up with ahead of time to make sure there aren't any duplicates. Also to want to make sure that you don't have any questions that might be inappropriate. It's nowadays that would be somewhat rare, but it does happen on occasion, having an inappropriate question in there. And so that my role is to help screen those out and coordinate them so that everyone has equal number of questions and that we're all set to go the day of the interviews. And
Marcia had a question, and then I think Rob unmuted himself. He had a question, so if that's okay.
Sure.
Thank you. Just in terms of screening, I'm always concerned because sometimes, there are certain attributes that actually might work well because there's often not just, a degree for somebody to do X. And so in that screening process, can we work with you to define what kinds of attributes and experiences or whatever is important to us so that would help you in the screening? Because I would hate to lose someone that might be of interest.
Absolutely. In fact, that, I talked about the profile. That's exactly what that is intended to do. That's why I would interview you and the other board members, as well as any other key people within your community. And you get to approve the final version of that profile, so that I'm not just putting things that I'm interpreting. It's things that I'm interpreting, but then you're approving as a board. And that gets sent out. So yes, that will be a guide to help evaluate each of the candidates as you go through the process.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And Rob, did you have a question? I saw you unmuted yourself. No, you're good. Okay, sorry to interrupt her.
Oh, no, this is great. I love questions. All right, so we're going to go to the next slide here down the road. So this is where we're actually going to be conducting the interviews. And part of my job is to schedule them. And as I said, prepare the questions. We can, if the committee wants, we can develop a form that you can use to evaluate each of the candidates as you go through the day or a couple days of interviews. And then the last element on this is an important one. And this is something where we'd have to have a conversation with you as board members. What role do you want this committee to play? Do you want to have it making a recommendation to the board as a committee, or do you want it individuals of that committee making a recommendation to the board? And there's a key distinction here. For example, I recently well, when I was manager of Williston, I was involved in hiring a new library director. And in that case, I had to work with an elected board of trustees, as well as the employees in the community. And so we went through the first round of interviews, and there was a definite disagreement amongst the panel members as to the best candidate for the position. I certainly had one opinion. And there were two, I think there were two library trustees that were on the committee. They had an opinion, fortunately, that coincided with mine. The rest of the committee's members had a different idea, and I think they may have been in the majority. So if you had taken a recommendation by the committee, it would not have been consistent with who I thought would have been best for the job, and the other two library trustees felt. So that's why I draw the distinction there. And there's ways we can structure that of debriefing and getting the recommendation. So that's just a key point, and we can talk about that more later if you have any questions on that. All right, so I'm going to move on then. So once you've gone through the first round of interviews, the goal of that committee is to narrow the field down to, say, 2 to 3 candidates. And these are candidates that are going to be interviewed by the select board, full board. But the day of the interviews, you can schedule a number of different activities, and each can provide information for the candidates, but also can provide you with some information about the candidates as well. For example, you could schedule a tour of the community, say a 45-minute tour, where the candidates get to physically see the community and have a discussion of whoever's giving the tour. I've always liked to use the town planner for that. But, and then after the tour, it's a good idea to talk to the town planner to get their insights as to what they saw from each candidate. It's an informal conversation they're having, but they get a sense of the types of questions that are being asked and the interest that is being through those questions from each of the candidates. So that can be valuable, even though they're not actually interviewing the candidates. We can also set up another interview committee. It can be a group of employees, a group of citizens. There's a number of different ways of doing that. For example, one approach I've taken is I've given candidates a written assignment. Ask them 1, maybe 2 questions, and ask them to come back with a written memo, which they then present to this committee and then have to explain why they made the various recommendations in that memo that they made. And then the committee gets to ask them questions about their recommendations. If you have someone in the community that is maybe an interim manager or someone else that is very familiar with the workings of the community, perhaps that each of the candidates can sit down with them and talk with them for about 45 minutes to get a better sense of the job. But here again, that's someone that could be valuable as far as getting their insights as to each of the candidates. And then finally, as I said, the select board are going to be interviewing each of the finalists. And so you'll be able to get a sense directly from the candidates as to what their strengths are and how they respond to the various questions that are posed to them by your board. And of course, once you've done all that, then you have to go circle back and figure out what input you're going to get from the people that conducted the tour. And if you have a group interview who was participating in that, what were their views? And kind of do a debriefing process of each individual separately. And generally that doesn't take too long, depending on how many people you have involved. But it only takes 5 or 10 minutes for each person normally to come in and explain why they felt candidate A was better than candidate B or whatever. So that's an important part of the process. And there's a fair amount of flexibility there that we can tailor that to meet your needs as a community. So I'm going to move on to the last step. So let's say you've gone to this last step and found someone you think you'd like to offer the job to. but you're not quite 100% convinced yet. So that's why this 6th step is important. We will conduct a complete reference check for each of the candidates you want considered. Generally, it's one candidate you're really focusing on. We'll hire an outside firm, I think his name is Bill Burgess, to do a background check. And there's a whole host of different things he checks for as part of that, including a social media check, a motor vehicle check, a criminal records check, and there's a whole, and I believe a credit check is another piece of that as well. And so once all that work is done, then I will come back to you as a board and give you a verbal report on what we found in the reference checks, the background checks, and everything else. And have a discussion with you as a board again, and see if you're ready to make a decision as to who you would like to offer the job to. If you have someone you'd like to offer the job to, then we can help you with the next step, which is to begin negotiations with the candidates. We recommend that you do enter into an employment agreement. We have all kinds of samples of that, but you're probably going to want to involve your attorney in at least portion of reviewing that. And perhaps 1 or 2 board members can be involved in the negotiations. That's something that's really up to the community to work through, but we can provide a little bit of help if there's any sticking points as you go through. And I think I've already briefly talked about my background. I have over 40 years of municipal experience, including 25 in Vermont. I've conducted many searches for department head level positions. And recently I just completed one for the town of Jericho. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thanks so much. I'm gonna stop the sharing of your screen so we can see you. And yeah, oh, there you go, you did it. So Marcia, I see you with your hand up, so why don't you go ahead and ask your question?
So I'm looking at 4 months and worrying, and I'm thinking, if we're really organized, can we cut it down?
You can cut that down a little bit. And I've already explained a couple of ways of doing that. One is to set the date of the interviews right up front. And so I'd have to work with you ahead of time on that. I think we can maybe cut the amount of time that we accept resumes down to maybe 3 weeks. I really don't feel comfortable doing any less than that. The normal is 4 weeks, but 3 weeks, I think we could do it. I share part of your concern. Well, maybe your concern is a little bit different, but one of the concerns I have working through this process is the longer you drag it out, the more you're likely to start losing candidates. And there's a long time just in the period where you're accepting resumes. 3 weeks is a long time. But if you have the interviews scheduled like days, perhaps after the deadline of submitting these, then that you can save a lot of time right there. So I think, I can work with you to keep it as short as possible.
And presumably we could set up those debriefing protocols and all of that, so we wouldn't be inventing the wheel as we were going along.
Right.
Use the 3 weeks.
Yeah. And of course, one thing that's also at the very, very end of the process is once the person's accepted the job, they're going to have to give notice to their employer. And that can vary. I think the normal would be about a month, but I recall when I accepted the job in Williston, I gave them my former employer 2 months because I felt that was really what they needed. But and of course, when I retired, I gave them 6 months.
Mary, I see your hand up, but I'm gonna, if I may, I'm going to just jump in and ask a question just because mine relates so directly to Marcia's. I hope that's okay. Sorry, I know that might be a little different. So I appreciate sort of the weeks outlining on each of the steps, right? So we can sort of expect sort of what our obligations are week to week. Can you just speak a little bit to how those sort of bullet pointed items get broken down in the sort of within the processes that we have for a meeting, right? So like one of my questions in thinking of this is how do these weeks what decision points need to be made in those weeks and how do they align with our calendar for our regularly scheduled meetings? So can you just sort of talk about how you will be keeping in contact with us, how it moves along? So does that make sense?
I think so. I'm not sure I'm going to answer all your questions, but I'll start with the last point that you made, because that's the easiest one. I think it's really helpful to have one person serving as a spokesperson for your community. And normally it's the chair, but it doesn't have to be. But if whoever it is, that's the person I'd be communicating with on a regular basis. And so there could be a number of telephone calls or emails back and forth as we work through the process. There are going to be times when you or whoever else you designate wants to check in with the full board. And so if we're moving this process right along, that's going to be important that we get that feedback right away. And whether it can be done informally through email, but you have to be careful because you can't have a email meeting. So that's something you're gonna have to work through. Maybe you have if you have a regular meeting schedule, hopefully we can work around that schedule. So
Imagine we may, this process may necessitate more meetings because I do think the board would appreciate regular updates on this matter. Regardless.
Yeah, and I'll be also be providing the board at least a monthly written status report. But that's just kind of something to inform the whole board. But with the chair or again, whoever is designated to work with me directly, there's going to be a lot of frequent contact at various points in the process.
Okay, Mary, go ahead. Go with your question.
Yeah, I have more a concern about the beginning of the process, actually writing the job description. We have kind of a job description that describes many of the duties of a town manager. I think not a narrative, and I'm just wondering how we will write that as a board, like how we will articulate our hopes for what could work really well for Norwich. Is there a way to get some support for us in doing that?
Well, I'm not sure. Some of the things you may be talking about may not be appropriate in a job description. They may be part of the profile. But the job description, we are certainly willing to take a look at it. And if there's something that sticks out there that doesn't belong or something that's missing we think does belong, we certainly can provide that advice.
Would that be based more on sort of typical duties, like the scope of what is expected, rather than something that's more about strategic planning or characteristics of the community and things like that?
Right. It includes duties, responsibilities. Probably the most important part is the how much experience you're looking for, how much education requirements you want to include in that. Those are really important part of the job description, because that's what when we're starting to look for candidates, those are the minimum requirements we're going to look for.
Okay.
And you often want to include some language that gives you a little flexibility too, like something like equivalent combination of experience and training. So you have but those are things we can look for and help you out.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Go ahead, Marcia.
Sorry. This is sort of maybe the cart in front of the horse, but I'm just wondering, some people have asked questions about a town administrator versus a town manager. At this stage, is that something that we should maybe take a moment to think about, or is that something that's a bigger deal that we should have to have voted and that sort of thing?
Well, that's a pretty big deal. And I suspect it was going to require a townwide vote. And if that's looming in the background where it might be changed, I would be reluctant to want to start the recruitment process, because if the change is in the middle of that, then you're looking for kind of a different group of people potentially. You know.
I
so-
didn't mean to suggest that that is in the looming, but I have heard
Right.
people talk about it and I just wanted to sort of hear about that. I don't even know how many town administrators there are in Vermont versus town managers.
Yeah, I don't know the number either. I don't know whether Abby has a better idea of that or not, but it's an important distinction, both for the community, but for the people you're going to attract, because the town manager has authority that's given to that person, that position by either town charter and or state statute. The town administrator has only whatever authority is granted to it directly by the select board. And so it can be kind of a tenuous position for someone to serve in that when you're not quite sure what authority you're going to have, and that can change from board to board. But for some communities, that seems to work. In Jericho, they have a town administrator, and the current board gives a lot of authority to that position. And so it's almost like a town manager position. But you know, every town's different. But as far as a town manager form, every town is not different because they all pretty much follow the same rules.
Yeah. Thank you.
Mary, we'll go ahead, and then we're a little over time, so I want to take another round, make sure everyone does another round. Go ahead, Mary.
I believe the town of Norwich has voted twice to, first to initiate the town manager form of government and then to uphold it. And I think we do have people that bring up the question of town administrator. I think it's always good to have people question and you know, want to know the value of our leadership and so forth. But my impression is that Norwich citizens are solidly, for the most part, behind the town manager form of government. So I'm just going to say that.
Okay, thank you, Mary. But Rob, do you have any questions about the proposal from VLCT, the process that they have outlined for us tonight? And then I want to talk about the actual agreement that we have in our packet.
So, Rick, I'm just curious, if we approve this agreement tonight, when can we start?
Well, we can get started pretty much right away. My schedule, I don't have any other clients at the moment, although we have 2 that are in the works. But I think the community that's needing to move the fastest is probably Norwich. And so, yeah, we can get started right away.
Okay, and looking at the profile and what you, I think you mentioned having select board sitting down with the select board members to see what we would feel would be critical in a town manager. Is that something that is done via email or between you and various members, or would you recommend a special meeting for us to start that?
My preference is to do it individually, and we can do it over the phone or by Zoom.
Okay.
It's by email would not cut it.
Okay, yeah, all right, thanks.
So just to be clear, Rick, one of the first steps is that you would reach out to individual board members to schedule all those interviews individually one-on-one with folks.
Well, I think one of the first steps is to, I have to make sure that we have a clear understanding of what you want in the process. You know, I've talked about a number of different options, so I can give you a kind of, you already have an outline of what I would propose, but there's a lot of little details. I need to get those ironed out right away and then get the schedule done and then start those interviews.
Okay, I understand. So we'll be hearing more from you. Okay. Rob, do you have any questions or comments about any?
Yeah, over the different searches you've done, have you noticed some very common questions or very common traits that people look for in this process that you could share with us so we have a framework to start from?
Sure, I can do that. we looking for more?
Go ahead, Claudette.
So I move to authorize the select board chair to sign the Vermont League of Cities and Towns Executive Recruitment Services proposal as included in the meeting packet.
Okay, is there, we have a motion on the table, is there a second? Seconded by Marcia, it looks like. Okay, any further discussion on the agreement? Okay, all in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, unanimous. Okay, so with that said, I think I want to thank Rick for his time and his presentation. That was really efficient and clear. We really benefit. That really inspires confidence to this process. So we thank you. And also thanks to Abby from VLCT for being available as well. She's here with us. So I will be hearing from Rick on immediate next steps.
Roger, first of all, thank you all for the this, and I just want to quickly ask, are you going to be the contact person, or does that to be determined?
I think it's I'm happy. I think I'm to hear from board members on that. I think at this point, I think it's appropriate to be in touch with me as we administratively get set up and as we begin. And then I think we could talk that as one of the things we'll decide.
Okay, well, we'll start with you and then go for it.
But to the extent that it's a matter of scheduling, I think it's appropriate. But I want to see some nods from board members on that. Okay, they're nodding, so that's wonderful.
Okay, good start.
Okay, thank you both.
Thanks,
Thank
Rick.
you. Good night.
Bye.
Thank you.
Abby. Thank you both.
Okay, so we're about 10 minutes over with appreciation to everyone. So the next item on our agenda is appointments. We have appointments to make to the Conservation Commission, the Development Review Board, and the Historic Preservation Commission. I think procedurally, I would like to begin with a motion on each of these, and then in discussion, if the person is here, they can introduce themselves and we can just discuss anything about the applicant. Who would like to begin with a motion for our first appointment? Go ahead, Mary.
I move to appoint Suzanne Leiter to the Conservation Commission for a 4-year term ending March 31st, 2025.
Second.
Okay, seconded by Rob. Any discussion on this applicant? I don't see them in the room. I think they're qualified and I appreciate their service or their willingness to serve. Anything else? Okay, is it appropriate to call the question? I'm going to do that. All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you. Can I get another motion?
I move to appoint Patrick Bradley to the Developmental Review Board for a 3-year term ending April 30th, 2024.
Is there a second?
Second.
Made by Mary, seconded by Rob. Any discussion on this applicant? And I don't see them here. Rod, are you familiar with the applicant?
I suspect that Alyssa Bradley is actually possibly.
She's here for something else.
Okay.
Okay, so no, I don't see them.
And does this Ben Lavaber work to talk so Rod's face can be seen or no?
Yes, when he talks, it'll get his audio, but
it won't get his.
It's not.
Okay, it won't get his face.
Right.
Okay.
Well,
Rod is here.
From the faceless development review. Patrick has attended the last development review board meeting, and give you a welcome addition.
Okay, thank you, Brad. Any further discussion? Go ahead, Marcia.
This has got to be the most minimalist application I've ever seen. So I don't even know why he's interested.
I don't disagree.
maybe I can elaborate. So Patrick is an attorney working in Hanover, has lived here for some time. As you can see, has a law degree and is interested in development issues and would like to contribute to the community in a way that he thinks he can make a meaningful contribution. And this is his chosen field. He already has friends and neighbors with one member of the Development Review Board and is familiar with the scope of the Development Review Board's work.
Does that help, Marcia?
Well, I think it's irregular to have the clerk of the DRB talking on the behalf of the applicant, but the applicant isn't here.
I should parenthetically remark that all I'm doing is attempting to provide information in the absence of the candidate who doesn't appear to be present.
And who presumably was available at the last meeting where these introductions were made. But I appreciate your points on all counts though, Marcia. Any other discussion on this applicant? Go ahead, Marcia.
In general, I think it's a good idea if it shows interest, if somebody is actually here to talk about their own petition.
Yeah.
So I wish the board would, require that.
And we do highly suggest it. It's been our practice to do so. I won't speculate as to why they have not made themselves available, but it's always requested. Okay. So I'm gonna call the question then if we don't have anything to add. All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, roll call. Claudette, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mary, how do you vote?
I vote yes.
Rob, how do you vote?
Yes.
Marcia, how do you vote?
Abstain, not enough information.
Okay, and I'm a yes. Okay, thank you. Is there another motion? We have one more. Two more.
Is- Okay. Are there 2 seats or 1 seat? Are there 2?
I believe there are 2 spaces available for the Historic Preservation Commission. We have 2 applicants.
I move to
Yes.
appoint Linda Cook to the Historic Preservation Commission for a 3-year term ending April 30th, 2024.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, moved by Rob. The applicant, we know is here, but any other discussion on this applicant?
I think-
Go ahead, Mary.
I just think Linda's part of the history of the town. Her lived here for generations. She's passionate about the town and its history, and she's part of it. So, and it's very appropriate.
Yes, that is well said, Mary. Linda, you're here, and to Marcia's earlier point, can you briefly tell us why you're interested in joining the commission? Star 6.
Why I am interested, I will tell you, my grandfather, Comrade Cook, got me started on history and wondering why taxes are so high, why this, and I couldn't answer a thing. So I started getting interested, and by looking at the history of the town and some of the programs that had been offered for the farmers here and other people, I started doing research of how the town has the makeup. And then moved on to doing some of the boards, some of the commissions. I was a past president of the Historical Society when we were over on Church Street. I also have been a volunteer for many years, recently working on the Farm Tour project and the Barn Survey project. I learned more about our town and how the barns were built and the families utilized them. So no matter what you think you know, there's always more things out there to learn. And I'm pretty comfortable talking with people, and I'm now working with families about pictures they may have of what Norwich looked like looked like at different times over the years. And it's been great for them, for me, and the Historical Society, gaining pictures and stories that we can preserve of our history here. And I started attending the meetings and participating, and really have enjoyed that with the group that's been working on these projects and where the future will go. So I support the Historical Society and this commission very strongly in their future growth. Thank you. Any questions?
No, thank you very much for being here and for that. Thank you, appreciate it. Can I call the question? I'm gonna call the question. All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, great. Thank you, Linda. One more motion, Mary.
I move to appoint Marguerite Ames to the Historic Preservation Commission for a 3-year term ending April 30th, 2024.
Okay, is there a second? Okay, made by Claudette. To be zero. Any discussion or anything that you want to highlight about this application? Go ahead, Marcia, thank you.
Clearly she has an interest in history. She's not here?
I don't see them.
Okay.
Yes, so so Marcia has identified an appreciation and for history, which is important for the historical commission. Go ahead, Marcia.
When we place these ads, could we please make a notation that the board would like people to appear?
Yes, Miranda is nodding because that is done, and when they're submitted, they're often told. So, we may choose to insist if we would like to prolong vacancies, right? That's what we can do. Okay. All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay. Roll call. Claudette, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mary, how do you vote?
Yes.
Rob, how do you vote?
Yes.
And Marcia, how do you vote?
Abstain?
Okay, and I'm a yes. All right. Okay. I think that is it for our appointments. Is that right? Yeah. So I'm going to move on to the next agenda item, which is number 6, the Trail in the Mill Tri-Nature Area. Board will discuss updated information regarding the reciprocal agreement between SAU 70 and Town of Norwich and their presentation of issues and considerations regarding permitting, compliance, and long-term installation. Okay, so just a little bit of back. Go ahead, Marcia.
Can you just slow down a little bit? You're talking quickly behind a mask.
Sure, I appreciate that. I was reading from the agenda, so hopefully that was understood. Okay, so a bit of a background. So on August 9th, I was alerted to the possibility that the an MOU between the Town of Norwich and SAU 70 was needed to be a part of our agenda, and then it was not finalized or made available in time for our packet for discussion. I was alerted, however, that I was sent something right for our August 25th meeting. And of course, at that meeting, we were shared another document that was not the one in the packet. And we discussed that MOU. And in the discussion of that MOU, there were sort of several broad topics, I will say, that were sort of introduced to us around installation costs and maintenance costs, but also the design and permitting process, the construction scheduling, and all of that and how it interacted with what was this MOU at the time. So I hope Rod has done a lot of work in sort of building the narrative, building a narrative and trying to help us understand and sort through all of these different aspects of this trail. So I hope the board would allow me to sort of didactically ask a series of questions to Rod so he can answer them. And that way our minutes will reflect a question followed by an answer. So and that's what I'm going to do, if that's okay. Any other thoughts? And then we'll have, of course, some discussion and questions, and we'll take public comment after. Okay. All right. So one of the things that we one of the big phrases that we've heard is that pursuing an ABA trail requires formalization of this formalization of Marion Cross's use of this area. So the formalization, right, that provided access to our asset and our land, the Milford nature area, was done through an MOU. So Rod, I know that you've since sort of consulted with our attorney on the MOU. Is an MOU still the right course of action to allow access to this area by our school, or is there something else that was suggested?
Thank you, Roger. So in consultation with town council, our preferred approach would be a reciprocal agreement, something such as a reciprocal license agreement. And the reasons for that is that generally a memorandum of understanding, an MOU, is a short-term document with a specific and predetermined outcome rather than an agreement that's ongoing. So it is our preference that we approach this from a slightly different point of view. The two key features are basically the reciprocal relationship between the Marion Cross School and the town of Norwich, where the Marion Cross School would be a codified understanding of their access to the Milford nature area. And it would be a understood and quantified understanding about the town of Norwich's recreation programs accessing school resources in after school hours and during summer for summer camp.
Okay. My next question is why is the reciprocal agreement rather than MOU reciprocal agreement the first step in before any discussion of a possible trail? And if so, why? And what kind of efficiencies or not does that bring to this process?
At this point, it's not resolved as to whether the school would be the applicant for the development project that is the ABA compliant trail, or whether it will be the town effectively being an applicant to its own process. So the interests of the school are not totally fleshed out at this point, and neither are the interests of the town. The process in terms of applying for a zoning permit are open, so you don't have to be the property owner to be the applicant. The applicant always has to sign the development, the zoning permit application, but an applicant can be a party that doesn't have an interest in the land. And so there are reasons to do with availability of funds and timing that might mean that it's preferable for the school to be the applicant or the reverse. And so it's a matter for the school and the town to work in partnership to arrive at a conclusion as to which is the most efficient and effective applicant for the zoning permit.
Okay, great. And so the reciprocal agreement, as you just said, sort of will clarify our interest and provide sort of the access to the reciprocal to the areas. My next question then is for a construction of any trail requires a permitting process, and is it appropriate at this point to speculate on how long or what the permitting process would look like, or even what the construction might look like, given the absence of interests of the mutual parties defined?
So the first thing to be clear about is that way back in the early summer, late spring, there were informal conversations between me and people interested in constructing the trail, and it wasn't clear that it was going to use gravel and hardpack. And then in subsequent iterations, it became clear that to meet architectural barrier Act standards, so that's ABA, not to be confused with ADA, that in fact the path or the trail would need to be layers of gravel built up to make a smooth and gentle base, gentle in the sense of the opposite of steep, and that the surface would be hard packed gravel. The original phase 1 called for a trail built in this method of about 400 feet in length. And so at that point, it became obvious that that definitely met the Norwich zoning regulations definition of development, and therefore would require a permit. As distinct from, say, an informal trail that might have been constructed from, say, wood chips and some rearrangement of existing fallen limbs or other material that you could find in a forest. So the question of the permit and what the process for the permit is, it's still to be unearthed in total detail, and I'm working with town council on that. My understanding is that there's an easement held by the Upper Valley Land Trust over the Milford Nature area, which requires us to respect certain attributes of the nature area. And that is another reason why the design process and the permitting process need to be carefully explored. If we're to be able to demonstrate subsequent to, assuming that we go ahead with the construction of the trail, which I don't think there's a lot of enthusiasm for and a lot of, commitment to on the part of all parties. But the question would become, how would you ensure that you've documented that the trail that you build is in fact ADA compliant? And so the design drawings that you would develop to demonstrate that it is in fact ADA compliant would be exactly the same kind of drawings in terms of their adequacy and their detail that you would need to submit for a permit application. So there's kind of an efficiency there in saying that the permit application process and the certification or verification that the trail is ADA compliant is basically the same process.
Okay. And so you just touched on this just now, but do we have enough information, or has the school or the town gathered any information to have a understanding of what the best practices or the legal obligations are for building a trail that meets federal compliance?
My understanding at this point is that you would use a professional in the field, either a landscape architect or an engineer, to use their so-called professional stamp, their professional membership of an organization, to submit drawings and a plan declaring that that project meets ABA requirements, and then subsequent to it being constructed, verify that it meets the specifications of the drawings as submitted for review. Subsequently, a sort of an associated part of this is that town council is currently exploring exactly what it means to have and maintain an ABA compliant trail from a legal standpoint.
Okay, and then my last question, and then I'll, which appreciate everyone's patience, is, and I know that this might be actually outside your wheelhouse a little bit, Rod, but I think last year during the start of the pandemic, right, the representatives from the town used the function of the MOU to an addendum, is what it was called, to allow access, and there was some tree work that was done as part of that process. And so it was that sort of shared agreement, there was that agreement and sort of that desire to get kiddos outside that sort of propelled and allowed for access. Why, what's different now? You have a way to, I know,
I think
but like, you know, what has changed? And what is it that we know about our obligations now that we didn't know then? As you if you might be willing to speculate a little bit.
Um,
That's, we didn't, like, the tacticism of this may suggest that there was some level of preparation, but I assure you there's not.
We don't have time for preparation. So on that point, I believe that everybody last year was motivated to come up with imaginative solutions to the problem of COVID-19 and maintaining access to school. And so it was a thoughtful and imaginative solution to the problem that we all encountered. I think that over the course of the summer, educators and staff of the town have become more aware of the obligation to meet the American with Disabilities Act requirements, particularly in the provision of education, and ensure that when we offer educational programs, wherever they may be, that we ensure that there's adequate access for people with different abilities. And so lastly, I think the town should, acknowledge that we have, with gratitude, that we have such vast resources in terms of outdoor recreation, and this is an opportunity to take it to another level.
Okay, thank you, Rod. Is there anything about sort of these issues that you would like to say that weren't achieved?
Just that it's taken, a couple of other points. It's taken, as you might imagine, quite a while to line up attorneys. We now have counsel for the school board working along with town council, and we hope to be able to schedule or at least begin the exchange of documents, draft documents for the agreement between those two representatives. And in the meantime, it's become clear that given the scope of the project, if it's the town that's going to do it, we'll obviously need to engage in the bidding process. And then lastly, it is already September and contractors are incredibly busy now for lots of reasons to do with COVID as well. And the availability of contractors and even materials would suggest that it's not going to happen between now and Thanksgiving.
Okay, exercise over, and I hope that added some clarity. I think we benefit from clarity. Do board members have any discussion points or questions about what Rod has offered to us? Yeah, Mary, I see your hand, and then Martha.
Just I appreciate the work that Rod and Roger have put into this. And I think it's better to be thorough and to really plan through, to have town council from both the school board and the town. I think it's very good. And that the ADA access is very involved, and we have to balance that against the land trust desire or, requirements to respect the natural qualities of the area. So there's really a lot to work out. I think it's possibly bitterly disappointing to families who would hope to, have access for their children this fall. But I think it's better for the future to work it really thoroughly.
Right, and as you know, the board learned of this on August 9th. Marcia, do you have your hand is up?
Thank you. I'm just hoping that the crux of this is that there will at some point be a reciprocal license agreement presented to us, that it will have a duration, and that there will be specifics about the landscape professional work that needs to be done and who's going to be paying those costs.
Rod, actually, do you want to clarify, because Marcia is asking about sort of cost or cost sharing. None of that has necessarily been discussed, other than the fact that neither the town nor the school is not unwilling to pay for it. In fact, we haven't discussed it. So can you just talk about the second point that Marcia made about sort of management and costs, and how these conversations haven't happened or will happen prior to a reciprocal agreement that the board will review and approve? Is that your question, Marcia?
Yeah, I just wanted the board to be aware that that would be a concern for me for the future. It seems clear that we don't know that sort of thing yet, but I just want to make sure that when it comes back to us, that's in there.
Yes, I really appreciate that. So point made, please. Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Okay, we'll take public comment. Check plan. Can you just say your name and then locatable address? That's usually our practice, and I haven't asked for that in the course of this meeting, but I would like to. Go ahead. Check. Go ahead.
Hi there. Sorry, I'm on my phone in my car. I'm not actually out in the forest as it may appear right now. We live at 1488 Beaver Meadow Road and have 2 students in the kindergarten. I would just like to be one person to raise the perspective of a parent. I think this is far beyond fairly disappointing, as it was just mentioned. This is a real health and safety concern for those of us with students in the school who are unable to be vaccinated yet. We saw everyone involved go above and beyond last year to make every possible accommodation to push for outdoor learning in the midst of this unprecedented pandemic. My 2 questions are, what was the decision-making process that led to the necessity to suspend access this year? Respecting the need and desire to, of course, reach that ADA access, but why that couldn't continue until this improvement was made. And second of all, if there's anything being done to provide an interim access this fall, as I've heard that it sounds like the likelihood of any progress will be pushed until next September, or next spring, rather.
So just to be clear, you asked 2 questions that I can answer when we take all public comment. What was the decision-making process regarding access? And then your second one was essentially about the timeline. Is that right?
Yeah, specifically the first question, and I can suspend the second question. It seems like the timeline is likely next spring. I guess that's more a statement than a question at this point. But what was the decision-making process to suspend access for students until this solution could be met, especially given the COVID pandemic?
Okay. Claudette, did you have a point that you make? Or...
Yeah, I just, it wasn't our decision to suspend access. My understanding is that the school, if they could not provide access to all students, then they could provide it to no students, is my understanding. So that was not this board. I believe I asked at the last meeting, can't we just extend this current agreement? And the school board response was no.
Right. So thank you for your question and for your perspective, but that's exactly right. It's not our decision to make. Because as she applied, we might have made other arrangements if this wasn't a compliance issue, right? An equity issue, as well as many of the other assets that you've sort of heard Rod elucidate. Okay, any other questions, public comment? I see Tom Camden. Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, to follow up on Chet's question, that is accurate and why providing access to all is important. We're hopeful, though, that we can still figure out a way to move quickly forward once we have mapped out what needs to be done from these permitting processes and bid processes. And I have some questions that I'm hopeful that we can shorten the process and look to ways to do so, if at all possible, and if that means the possibility of expedited permitting processes. And I'd be interested in hearing more about that. If UVLT is willing to look at that, if the abutters to the property are willing to look at that, to be able to reduce the time periods that are generally required. And then with regard to the bidding process too, I understand that there are some emergency purchase clauses within the town purchasing plan that might be able to be applied to this situation. And just was wondering if that's possible, once we get to.
So Tom, is there a question in there? Is there a question that you have for this board? Because otherwise you are.
There were two
representing,
questions in there, Roger, and I'm hopeful with regard to, I'm wondering if there's a possibility of expediting a permitting process. And I'm wondering if it's possible to look at this as an emergency purchase once we get to that point and working through, because I really don't see the reciprocal agreement as the portion that's really holding the timeline back. I think we can hammer that out relatively easily between the two boards, just determining the costs and nature of that. But it's just once we get to the permitting and the bidding process, I'm wondering if there are ways to go about expediting those processes. So that's my question.
So we're happy to answer these questions. So one of the questions was, would obviously a bidding for construction is subject to the town's master financial policies, which includes putting things out to bid and getting competitive bids. And that is indeed a process. And so there is an emergency provision often for in storm or emergency situations. So the question was, does this qualify as an emergency under the purchasing policy, as we understand it? So Rod, do you have an opinion on that? And then I could ask board members the same question. But
yes, my reading of the emergency policy is similar to Roger's, that it would be an unforeseen event causing significant damage or the requirement to replace a key piece of equipment or infrastructure. And so my immediate response is that this is unlikely to meet the definition of an emergency. That being said, I acknowledge that obviously COVID-19 figures as something of an emergency, and we have had an emergency response to COVID-19, but I don't believe that fits the definition of emergency in this. And then the other question about expediting the permitting process, there is no mechanism to expedite the permitting process. It's statutorily provided for, and it would be inappropriate for a public entity to use its status in the community to encourage people to forego what are their legal rights as abutters or residents that could be impacted by a project.
okay, thank you. And then I will say too, obviously the reciprocal agreement decides, it helps clarify who the applicant would be, which has not been decided yet. And so if the school is an applicant, of course, I'm here to remind you of your own sort of financial policies, and there is a bid process inherent in your work as well. But we are not talking necessarily about that because the reciprocal agreement will decide who is the applicant for this project, right? Something that as a first step, it's unfortunate that we have arrived at that as a first step at this stage. But between August 25th and now, we have worked really diligently to find some answers to these questions. Marcia, do you have your hand up?
Yeah, just in terms of emergency purchasing, we're still going through the financial policy and approving those separate policies. I can't remember if we finished the purchasing one, but it may be that we want to review that.
Okay. I don't think we had, and when we discussed it, I don't think that was one that was slated. We had added the sort of green purchasing, and then we had completed it as we had decided. But yes, I take your point. Do board members have any other questions, or otherwise I'll finish a round of public comments if there are any. Good, Mary.
Just when shall we expect to revisit this? Like when the town council and the school board council have reviewed, or?
So I think actually, Mary, that leads me to a suggestion. I'm going to look to Rod a little bit here. Would it be appropriate to take a motion to sort of authorize Rod to in turn authorize our attorneys to begin work on a reciprocal licensing agreement? So so if we would like sort of we could take a motion on that. I encourage it actually. If that's something we want to do.
I think yes, because I think it should be done correctly. And I think this is a way to do that. And I do think that the trail would be beneficial for school children and also other people in the town who have disabilities. So I think it's a very worthwhile effort. I think should be done properly. So, so moved, Roger.
So Mary, so just to be clear, Mary moved a motion that authorized Bob Francis to have the attorneys begin developing a reciprocal license agreement in partnership with SAU 70. Is that your motion?
Yes.
Okay. Is there a second? Okay, seconded by Rob. Any discussion on that motion? Go ahead, Marcia.
Just assuming that, not assuming, but with clarification that that's what the attorneys have recommended. Yes,
Let's hear it from Rod on that.
that's a yes or no, Rod.
Our attorneys are recommending that we could enter into a reciprocal licensing agreement.
And it will have a duration and it will also have cost apportionment.
It will have duration. It will specify who's responsible for submitting any permit applications for development, who will pay for the permit applications, who will pay for any installation in the woods, who will pay for maintenance, on what schedule, and what mechanisms there will be if there's a dispute or an unforeseen circumstance.
Does that answer your questions, Marcia?
Yeah, and obviously, who's going to be able to use it when? And the reciprocal nature of using.
As part of the reciprocity, yes.
Right.
Okay, any other discussion on this motion on the table? Okay, all in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you. Any other discussion or any other public comments? And then we should move on. Go ahead, I see someone in the room. Can you just, you'll pick up your voice, so you can just state your name.
Sure.
And, yeah.
That's, well, it's not doing. No worries. So Brian Ryerson on 59 Union Village Road, Vermont. First, I really want to clarify that this is not hard on the kids. This isn't, oh, I've had kids at school, this must be challenging. This is literally devastating, okay? Mentally devastating for these children. There is no, they are in the middle of a pandemic that has not stopped. We have our vaccines, we're good. Everybody all jabbed up, right? They don't have a choice. This was their get out of school. This was their ability to have something to go for. My kid every day goes, why can't I go learn in the woods? My kids who have been doing this for not 1 year, we didn't just start this last year. This has been happening for years in these woods. It's one of the reasons why people are coming to this town. There's a reason we have 40 families over there. Kids or something of that nature. 60. This is like one of the values of Marion Cross School. Sure, okay, it's Norwich Town, whereas did we own it? Okay, fine. Select board, do your select boarding things. But literally, that's why they came. The education outside, escaping the pandemic, which is ravishing our country still. This is an emergency, hands down. Okay, so there's not even a debate on the table here about that. Okay, the question is now, we have obviously got ourselves in a pickle. We need to do it right. You're 100% right about that. We have no choice in doing it the right way. Okay, what are we going to do for the kids now to help them in the meantime? Okay, because we can't let them down. We can't walk out here and be like, sorry, you're in red tape. That's not fair. That's not doing our jobs as adults. Just because it's hard, just because there's a process that needs to be taken care of. You can't tell a kindergartner that. Kindergartner's like, can I take my mask off? I just want to eat a sandwich. Right? I mean, like, I just feel like we're bureaucrating our children. And there's been MOUs in that woods for eons. Oh, I signed an MOU with Dartmouth to build trails in Boston Lawn for years. This isn't unheard of. Hardpack. If it's in the way, we'll rip it up with an excavator because it's not anything crazy. There's already a trail there. Literally, there's 10 feet of a gradient that we need to take care of to make it ADA compliant. 10 feet, okay? We're not trying to build the skywalk like Ben's that needs to take care of everybody. We're literally trying to cover a 10-foot section of hard pack to make a gradient turn from 12 degrees to 5 degrees, because that is what the ADA requirement is. It needs to have curbs on the side. It needs to have a nice hard pack that you can put a wheelchair on. It needs to have a 5% gradient if it's over 200 feet. Okay? This is not ADA, because if it was ADA, which is a whole different ballgame. But we are in the woods, and there's ways that we can move and we can be diligent. We can figure out a solution here. Okay? And I really, really encourage this group to do that. Like, really, these kids are suffering. Mental health in this town is sky high. And you all know this. You've seen it. You've seen posts from Dan. You've seen the destruction to our teens and to our children. Help us. Don't tell us we need to get a permit. Find us something we can do. If it's a patch in the meantime, patch it and do it the right way. Come June, but don't make these kids suffer because we didn't get our act together. That's not fair. That's not what Norwich is. So my question is, what are we going to do?
Thanks for your public comment. I'm gonna ask for any other public comments, and then I see your hand, Marcia. Go ahead, Jenny Barba.
Hi,
Jenny.
hi, I'm Jenny Barba. I live on Turnpike Road. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Hi, I echo all of the parents and teachers and administrators concern for the children. The urgency of this is absolutely critical to a successful school year for 315 children who know that the forest is there, they see it, they can go on it with outside of school, and there are ways we can work as a community. Parents are willing and able to volunteer and help. We know there are rules and regulations, and those are extremely important. And if there are any ways to have emergency exemptions to certain policies and procedures, we urge this to happen for the sake of the children and the teachers as soon as possible. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your public comment. Marcia, did you have your hand up?
I just wanted to say that I think the whole board understands this, and we feel it deeply because some of us are parents too. So we understand, and I think what was said here tonight was that we are looking for expedite routes. And Rod's been told what to do, and we're going to investigate how to move through this as expeditiously as possible. But we're also going to do it legally.
It's not a solution.
The only thing I'll add, Marcia, is yes, sort of since August 25th, we've done a lot of work to provide the clarity and the way forward for this. And I think we will certainly keep folks updated, as Jenny asks, any kind of parental involvement, direct parental involvement, we're willing to cooperate with the school on any kind of alternatives that may require permitting. I think I have a 10-month-old. I was born at the height of the pandemic. I can certainly appreciate what is said here. I hope you can certainly also appreciate, that I can't, as a parent, it doesn't change my obligations as a board member or our obligations as a board. But we're working very quickly to provide clarity and identify the next steps. So I think Marcia said it best, but I did want to echo that. Okay, any other board member comments or public comment? Jenny, I see your hand again, and then we may move on.
Yeah, just one other thing, really, for the kindergarteners, this is part of their curriculum. And if they are not able to be utilizing the forest or land for their outdoor curriculum, they will miss an entire school year of their curriculum. That includes one entire day in the forest that the teachers put together. So if there are any adjacent properties where the kindergartners, and especially also Lindsay Putnam, her entire LEAP curriculum is outside. So if there's any ideas or areas from this committee of ideas or people we can bring in, please let us know.
Thank you, Jenny.
So there is a solution.
I'm sorry, I have three other folks who are looking to make a full comment, okay? We're over time and we're making sure everyone's heard. Peter and then Andy and then Lucy, okay? Peter, go ahead.
I believe Andy was.
I called on you, Peter. I'm sorry that I didn't see Andy's hand first. Can you please make your public comment?
Hate cutting in front of Andy. I want to support what the parents have been saying. I think the frustration you're hearing is something that I am frankly too accustomed to in the board. I know that you guys are trying to do the right thing, and I totally appreciate that. And I'm 100% behind any ADA compliance that we need to do. But the idea that we're not in an emergency and it isn't something that needs an extra push in terms of leadership. And I think that's what people are asking for here. So I want to lend my support to what Jenny and the others have been saying. Thank you.
Yes, there's no disagreement that it's not an emergency. We're just wondering if it's even inappropriate to discuss what sort of bid processing under our financial policies is appropriate because we're nowhere near that step at this point, right? Go ahead, Andy.
Hi, Andy Shearer, 23 Hazen Street. This will be very quick. I just want to remind everyone this was the school's decision, not the select board's decision. So if people could talk to the school, I think that will give us more traction. Thank you.
Really appreciate that, Andy. Thank you. Lucy, go ahead.
Hi, I just want to briefly state my support for the other parents. I have a 4th grader, a 2nd grader, and a kindergartner at Marion Cross. And my understanding, and I apologize, there's thunder, so my dog is freaking out. But I wanted to, again, thank you guys for trying to do this the right way, but also to say that, as Jenny said, this is part of the kindergarten curriculum, and this is also part of how the school recruits teachers and finds people who are a good match, and how, as the other parent had mentioned, how people choose to move to Norwich. It's a really crucial part, and I think you're seeing from the attendance tonight that there's a lot of really strong interest, and anything the parents can do to help make this possible would be.
Thank you, Lucy, and your dog. Wendy, go ahead.
Thank you. This is Wendy Teller Ellsberg. I live at 60 Church Street, and I wanted to thank all of you for your public service. Thank you to the select board members. Thank you to the teachers who may watch this now or later. I really am trying to see it from a teacher's perspective, and I know it can be very disappointing to have had plans to be in the forest and then have to pick it in the midst of the stress of already teaching during a pandemic. I feel it's important for all of us to maintain a tone of respect and presume positive intentions. My experience with various stakeholders in this situation has been that I don't believe anyone has done anything malicious or intentionally bad. I think it's probably true that some things could have been done better, and it's really unfortunate. And I would urge us all to think about what we can do to help make it better, because we're all really just here talking for the sake of all of our children, our beautiful children. So I echo what Andy said. Let's all reach out to the school and see what we can do to help. If you're interested as a parent in lending your support to kind of an informal group, of parents interested in outdoor education at Marion Cross, you can reach out to me. I'm at wendyteller@gmail.com, or any other person who's interested in this group. There's no leader. It's just kind of a group of parents that want our kids to be outside and want our kids to be safe during COVID. So I want to thank you all again. And I hope that the situation is resolved, and I hope that we all learn something from it in the end and can do better next time. Thank you.
Thanks so much for your public comment, Cindy. Any other comments? Otherwise, I'm going to ask again of the board, and then I'm going to move on. The board members, any other further discussion, or can we move on this agenda item? And sir, you had a public comment earlier. I want to make sure I didn't want to. Do you want to make it?
Well, yeah, let me make it because I think it's an interesting solution. I talked with a number of people today, and it's my patch, right?
Can you just say who you are?
Sure, so it's Brian again, sorry, 59 Union Village Road. And Tom, it's be interesting to get your opinion because there is school involvement here, right? And we gotta figure out this. So there's a piece of property on the school that is actually right kind of behind Whitney's house that has a outdoor classroom present, and it's 100% on school property. It will require still a boardwalk of some type to be put in place, but because it's on the school property, it could be wooded, and then a group of Norwichians could put it together relatively easy. Because again, it's pressure to be wooded, it can be taken down at a later time. The question though, Tom, and then what that would hopefully allow us to do is to get the kindergartners to take care of an ADA situation, to get kindergartners out to a classroom. But Tom, would that then allow us to potentially, kind of goes to the town as well, sign an MOU extension to June? I know it's not exactly what we should be doing, but we've been doing it for years and years and years. To allow the rest of the school to still use the forest as is, go through the process for the next 9 months to do all this the right way, and then go forward with, and so that when we can get the contract in place, we can have the money lined up, we can have all the agreements ironclad, but it at least helps us patch something in the next like 2.5 weeks, because all the solutions I'm hearing are long.
So you addressed the school board chair several times in our meeting, so I would suggest that you do so at their meeting or any.
I'm just trying to be timely.
And yeah, I appreciate that. So you should address the school board at their school board meeting. And the only thing I will add is the town, the school, if they are building something that requires a development project or anything that requires permitting, they are a landowner and they can file it with the town, and we will cooperate in a way that meets our obligations and prioritizes it.
But would you guys allow us to resign the MOU as is?
That is what I offered, what I offered. Okay.
That's on you. The MOU is on you guys. If they come back and say, can we have an extension through June? Are you guys okay with that?
I think that anything that the town, any development project or any project that the school chooses to do on their land that they own, should contact the appropriate office for the permitting process to determine if it is required. Okay.
And I spoke with Rob about that. We
Okay,
already
great.
talked to him and linked about it today.
I'm glad.
So my question was, would you sign the MOU if they said it was okay?
I'm not going to answer your question. I'm going to move on. But with thanks.
This is,
Okay.
you don't have an answer, or what? I mean, this is 100% on you.
It's just not appropriate to answer. Okay. So I'm going to call order and then take one more public comment from Jenny with truly, I hope that's okay. And then we'll move on. Okay. So Jenny, do you have your public comment and move on? So you get the last word, and hopefully there'll be a good exiting. Anyway, you have the last word.
I want to just get on public record that I'm feeling as a parent that this issue, while there are regulations and process and procedures, I am feeling that we are getting told that we need to move on. It's 8:30 at night. We've all had to put children to bed. We have children with mental anxieties. It's a very stressful time for the 300 times 2, potentially 600 parents in this town, plus their grandparents, that we are getting pushed aside because of a timing issue. There is a process, there are procedures, yes. There are also ways to expedite and move things along with a strong sense of leadership and urgency. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. And I wanted to I want to respect people's time. So if I'm moving on from the agenda item, certainly not moving on from this issue. I want to respect I want
I
to
would
make sure
like
that
to know
answers.
who is leading this? We have no clear, there are many parties involved. We need a leader. We need someone who will say, here's the timeline, here are the steps, here's what we need to do, and let's hold people accountable. Let's get the money in, let's get it done. Let's find solutions.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree, and I appreciate that question, right? Because I think that's actually one of the things that has could benefit more from some clarity. So and I'm taking liberties to answer your question. I hope that's okay with board members. But on our side, the primary contact since August 25th on this issue, right? And really actually since August 31st has been Rod Francis. So the town manager's office and Rod in the interim role is coordinating this for the town, right? And you heard that the board took action to begin the first step of the process as advised to us, right? So we worked. So I appreciate the call out that this is mechanical and sounds procedural and didactic, and I take that criticism and I apologize, right? But Rod is there to answer your question. Rod Francis is coordinating for the town, and he has continued to communicate with my understanding with Sean and Tom Camden. But I think that's a question for the school as well. Your same question, okay? Did that help? I appreciate the call out, and I'm trying my best, okay?
Thank you.
Any other comments? And if people feel like when I say any other comments, I truly mean it. So we are over time on our agenda because we have other business, right? But we're taking more public comment. If folks have any other points that they would like to make. Okay. Board members, do you have anything to offer? Want to help me out at all? Okay, go ahead, Marcia. And then you're on mute.
I was just going to say, to reiterate what you're saying, there's two parties here, and we're trying, from our point of view, trying to expedite it, trying to get our attorney to expedite it, and the balls will roll in as they will, but it's also the school department. And I think that's been said a couple of times. And I think everybody has the same goal to make this happen as fast as possible. But, to cross all the T's, understanding that in a pandemic, some of the T's are crossed more quickly, but we still have two parties to get through this. And we also have the ADA, and that can't be fluffed.
Thank you. And so I'll ask again for public comment for anyone who wants to speak, and then I would like to move on from this agenda item, certainly not this work. Okay. Go ahead, sir.
Check one again, 14 Deer Meadow, now live in person, previously on the phone in my car trying to get here. Just to clarify, who made the decision to suspend access for this year when this was solved? Was it the school board or the principal?
I can tell you that it was not us, and it would not be our prerogative to make these decisions. So in terms of whether it was the board or the school to suspend access and what their considerations for that is really a question for them. I don't want to speak out of turn for them.
It looks like Tom Cannon.
And I don't necessarily want to take a question that should be forwarded to them at our meeting, but I will happily do it in reference, in appreciation for the comments that I was hearing earlier. Okay, so go ahead, Tom. Would you like to answer that question?
It was the school in consultation with the administration. Yes.
The gentleman asked if it was the principal or the board.
That's what I said. It was the school board in consultation with the administration.
Okay. Okay. Okay, any other folks? Okay, I'm gonna move on to this agenda item. I really appreciate this, and I hoped that the approach provided some answers, while understanding that there's still some questions to get resolved. And as I said, I am also a parent, and I really do appreciate, what I'm hearing. I know that sounds performative, but it's not, and I think all the board members have said a version of that. Okay, so I'm going to move on from this agenda item. Okay, and we took a motion for an action, so please have confidence in that. Okay. All right. Next, we have an interim town manager report. An update on significant happenings, including updated COVID guidance, IT implementation, onboarding and finance structure. Rod had a little bit of that in his in the packet. So Rod, go ahead. Why don't you hear from you a little bit?
Thank you, Roger. Good evening, everyone, again. So just quickly, as you probably are aware from looking at the news and from other towns, some other towns in the region are taking more serious steps to respond to the Delta variant. We last reviewed our emergency COVID-19 contingency emergency plan on June 16th, and it hasn't been updated since then. I'm bringing it to your attention. I don't have a strong feeling necessarily, or feel confident that I have the necessary information to make a really clear recommendation. But I feel that it's a topic that I'd like to hear from you on, and work to ensure that we can provide appropriate workplace safety for our staff, and then also ensure that people who access the building for whatever reason are able to feel secure, and then also act in a way that's responsible towards us. So I don't know whether we want to do that discussion right now in light of being over the agenda, but I wanted to sort of flag it as something that we should work on.
Marcia, go ahead. Do you have a comment?
Yeah, I think it's efficient to do it as we go through. I wasn't too sure if this reference to contingency emergency plan number 9 was some document, or if it's just, that's going to be the 9th, proclamation or something. But whatever it is, I think that our big neighbors are going, are requiring masks, and everything is, ratcheting up together with the incidences of disease. And I think that it would be prudent for us to require masks in the buildings.
Okay. So yes, you're right. Number 9 would be the one subsequent to number 8, which is the one that's current. And so the question is, should we replace number 8 with number 9? And if we do, should we make mask wearing in the building mandatory?
Go ahead, Mary.
I agree with Marcia. I think also the ventilation in Tracy Hall is not good. We've all heard about that. We need to protect our employees and the public. So I would be pretty confident about it. I would want to have masking in Tracy Hall at the very least. So, and I think with, with winter, the situation may get worse. We'll just keep monitoring it, but I wouldn't hold back on it, on the masking.
Okay, so I'd like to hear from a couple of others of you. If you're all broadly in agreement, then I'll draft something up and I'll circulate it via email with a limited way of commenting.
Go ahead, Claudia.
Yeah, I agree. Masks and indoor spaces for everyone.
Rob?
We've already started doing that at the high school, and it's been helpful. It's been something that people have gotten used to pretty quickly.
Okay, so that's some feedback, right, Rob?
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Next item I met with representatives from CCI. They're the new managed service provider that we have signed a contract with, and we're able to work through some initial issues. I've provided them with some contact information for previous IT services provided to the town so that we can transition from the existing arrangements to their new system. The expectation is that over about the next 6 to 8 weeks, there'll be multiple visits from CCI personnel, replacing key items of equipment and then enabling a so-called onboarding to their system, starting with email. And so we have received information about how to generate a ticket, a so-called ticket, if there's something wrong with your equipment or your access to equipment, and have a series of phone numbers and emails. And so in the next day or so, I'll send out an email to staff, guiding them through the new process for resolving a technology issue. It's going well, but like everything else, there are some concerns with the supply chain with key pieces of equipment and their location off somewhere in the Pacific. So, and I'll be, so that's the update there. Capital budget planning. We've already met fielding, which is good, and capital budget planning. We've received draft capital budgets from fire, police, and the listers. The listers project is actually the reassessment, the townwide reassessment, which is a large expense and needs to be discussed, I guess, with some caution by the board. I'm expecting a capital budget from Recreation before September the 8th. And so things are progressing well. I've also just been discussing capital budgeting with Fielding already, and hope and expect that he'll be in a situation to support the board in their decision-making process very soon. I'm happy to take any other questions if you've got them specifically.
Any questions? Bob, go ahead. You're on mute.
I would stress that during this time of transition for the IT system, that everybody should be made extra cautious about vulnerability to being phished, to being scammed into making inappropriate moves, that there should be no hesitation on the part of anybody on staff to call to confirm whatever emails they see.
I should point out that Fielding reported today that there have been multiple phishing efforts directed to him on his first day using his email, and that using products that are known to exist, like Adobe products that we are known to have and use for internal procedures. And so he's been warned and alerted, he's aware, but we do need to be vigilant.
Go ahead, Marcia.
Rob, I'm familiar with some organizations doing training in phishing. And so I'm just wondering, do you know of some, good training procedures that we could ask everybody to undertake?
My understanding is that after the event 2 years ago, that a firm called KnowBe4 was brought in to do some training. They're the only ones I'm familiar with that specifically address those kind of areas, the areas psychological malware tricks. And amongst some of the things they do is send out bogus emails to see who responds in the incorrect method. Whether or not they would have any new, whether or not we have enough new staff that talking to them again would be worthwhile, I don't know. Neither do I know what they charge.
Yeah, it might be good to look into a tune-up.
Go ahead, Claudette, and then maybe Rod has some insight, and then we'll move on, although I hesitate to say that now. Go ahead,
I
Claudette.
believe that VLCT also provides and offers training that would probably be either free or less expensive.
We've used know before. That was a very tricky sentence to say. And I'm aware of the VLCT program. I'll happily reach out to CCI, our new providers, and see if they've got any recommendations. And I think I'll encourage staff to refresh their memory by taking training with VLCT or something similar. So I'll get back to you if there's cost involved, and we'll arrange that.
That's great. Any other questions for Rod with appreciation? And go ahead, Marcia.
I'm just wondering, one of the plan things here for our new director was to demonstrate familiarity with procedures and programs and policies. And I'm wondering, demonstrate to whom? Because it should be somebody who's familiar with all of them, right?
Yes, that's a good point. It would be my expectation that if you're demonstrating them, at least in part to me at the level of policy, and then being able to reassure the treasurer and other staff, key staff, that he comprehends the policy and how it's going to work. So yeah, I'm not pretending to be in a position to understand the minutiae of the financial policy, but I am hoping that the treasurer will be supportive in that regard.
I would hope so.
Okay. Anything else? Okay, let's move on from this agenda item and take our break. We're going to take a 10-minute break. We'll come back at 9. Okay. Are you guys good? Okay, I'm resuming the Wednesday, September 8th regular select board meeting at 9:01 p.m. The next item on the agenda is an update relating to the DPW director search. I had suggested that an executive session would be required, but I actually don't believe that's required in order to hear an update on the personnel matters relating to the DPW director. I think Rod can sort of speak to us generally about where we are or where we're not in the search. And so we'll do that. So go ahead, Rod, why don't you update us?
Hello, everyone again. So as you may know, one of the last human resource processes that Herb Durfee had attended to as town manager was to interview applicants for the DPW director position. You'll also remember that Larry Wiggins, the previous DPW director, retired earlier in the summer. So four candidates were interviewed. One was an internal candidate, 3 were external. We made an offer to a candidate. I was part of the interview team, as was Rita Cito from the Two Rivers Regional Planning Commission, which is traditional in this role. And we were also joined by Masaki from Public Works Office. Given her role as the assistant to the DPW director, it was thought by Herb that it would be important to get some response from her as to the suitability of the candidates. The candidate that we made an offer to was by far the most qualified and with the most experience. And after a period of reflection, the applicant declined the offer. This leaves us in a situation where we need to reflect on the way the position was advertised and the way we approached the process from the point of view of where we advertised the position and what our expectations were. The applicant we made the offer to, the candidate we made the offer to, had an engineering degree, and in fact had an engineering practice and many years of experience working as a professional engineer, as did Larry. An observation of Larry's that was important, and I think is important for you to identify and understand, is that while Larry was a professional engineer, his contract did not allow for the town to pay for his professional engineer liability insurance, which meant that he would be using his own insurance if he was ever engaged in a design or professional engineering process where he was required to use his stamp. In other words, stamp documents or drawings saying that that he was a professional engineer. This was a point of contention, I think, to be fair, between him and Herb. I don't know the extent to which the select board was aware of that constraint, but it meant that Larry was reluctant to use his PE qualifications in fulfillment of the town's work. So I think that the other thing that's worth reflecting on is the extent to which, if we were to hire a professional engineer, how much professional engineering work they would be doing in any one week, given the size of the town, the scope of the work of the Public Works Department, and the kinds of activities that we undertake. It may be more appropriate for us to find a candidate that is not a PE, but has considerable experience operating in a small setting such as Norwich, with the kinds of conditions that Norwich has, and has an ability to establish a good rapport with the DPW crew to get the maximum benefit from the department, and then contemplate engaging in a contract with a professional engineer to provide services on an as-needed basis for development review and for town projects, so that we could submit high-quality grant applications and undertake local work that met the requirements of the town. The last part I think that we should contemplate is where we advertise and how broadly we advertise. I believe that we used Indeed.com and the VLCT classifieds and the Valley News. There are other New England-based regional web-based services where you can advertise that would potentially broaden the pool of candidates. And I feel like making a more sustained effort to get a bigger initial pool of candidates could yield better results.
Thanks so much, Rod. So do sort of board members sort of understand sort of the sort of two questions that Rod has sort of framed for us, asking sort of after the qualifications and the job description of a possible future candidate, and then the points about sort of the scope of where we post this document. Go ahead, Mary.
I think Rod's analysis makes a lot of sense to me. And I don't see why we would want to, again, move forward with a professional engineer. You know, I think we need a different type of individual, need experience, but I don't think we need that level of expertise. And as he said, we could contract out for specific situations if we need that expertise. And we may have a bigger pool that way and find a perfectly qualified person. And I also liked his suggestions for advertising. So I support, you know, I just like the analysis and I like the idea that we could move in that direction.
Claudette, thank you, Mary. Claudette?
Yeah, I agree with Mary, and personally, I wasn't aware of the friction between the two previous people. But I also, you know, because we have to go, because of how things are contracted out and how the grants are applied, I'm not sure that an engineering degree is of any value, truthfully. And I'm getting slammed by a thunderstorm, so if I lose power, I'll be off, but I'll be back because my generator hopefully will kick in.
Okay, thank you, Claudette. Okay, so, Marcia, do you have a point? You're on mute. You're on mute, Marcia, sorry. You're still on mute, Marcia.
I'm not sure she's indicated that she wants to talk.
I clicked too much.
It's okay. Go ahead.
This is a question for the board. Was this the first time we'd ever hired an engineer?
I think so. I think, yes. I mean, our former director was here for decades.
Right.
I think it was his father, so yeah.
Well, it seems to me that if we're going to have a director who's an engineer, we should have paid his fees for
Right.
insurance. But Claudette, are you okay?
Yeah, I am. I just wanted to say that we had absolutely no influence or input or anything when Larry was hired. It was, we were informed after he was hired.
Well, I was just going to say that if we have never had one before until this time, and as long as the person we hire knows enough to know when he needs an engineering expertise to weigh in on the situation, then I would say we could advertise and see what we come up with.
So you're sort of echoing a little bit of Claudette and Mary's points. Okay.
I am.
Okay. Rob, do you have thoughts, friend?
Now, I'd be curious also, like Marcia was, whether or not it was just a fortuitous coincidence that he had an engineering degree and that sort of brought him to the top of the pile, but wasn't a prerequisite. It does seem like it's silly to have that as one of the requirements that we're looking for a replacement.
I think I just want to clarify, actually, thank you, Rob. But with Rob, it sounds like the town wasn't able to necessarily utilize the benefits of a licensed engineer with Larry, is that right? That's what Rod is saying. So even though he was a PE, he didn't necessarily, did these things.
So you're saying he couldn't function as an engineer because he wasn't actually licensed to function as an engineer. I mean, he wasn't actually insured.
Right.
Exactly, and so it was a point of difference between, my understanding is that, and I'm not saying that I know the complete picture, but my understanding is that in light of the fact that the town wasn't paying for Larry's insurance or making a contribution towards Larry's liability insurance, working as a licensed engineer, he didn't do work as a licensed engineer for the town. He reviewed plans, development plans with me, and did a whole lot of work that drew on his engineering background, but he demurred from being in a situation where he was making a declaration that as a licensed engineer, these drawings are correct or some such thing as that. So I appreciate people's feedback. I actually think that speaking more as a planning director than as the acting town manager, I found Larry's contribution, as an engineer, valuable. And just like I have the need to call on the expertise of town council every now and again to be able to work with somebody on an occasional basis, reviewing substantial, complex drawings and so forth, to see if applications meet the engineering standards that we reference in our regulating documents, would be extremely helpful to me. And so if I was in a situation where the new DPW director had very limited skills in terms of reading plans or reviewing plans, then it would be, it would be an added strength for me. I think that the quality of my work as a planning director would be impacted negatively by that. And then there's many other projects small projects that would benefit, I think, from us being able to utilize an engineer on a retainer basis.
Okay, Marcia, go ahead.
Not opposed to advertising for an engineer, but I think that, you know, if we're in for a penny, we're in for a pound, and we do it properly this time if we do it.
Right, and that speaks to your second, yeah, the broad second.
I agree.
Yeah. So go ahead, Claudette, and then.
Yeah, I still, you know, when we go through the grant proposal processes though, we generally have to contract out all of that engineering work. And I don't know, did we not have to contract out for that engineering work when Larry was here and we just did it anyway? Or is it a requirement of many of the grants that we apply for? And that question, I'm not sure anybody has an answer to.
Thank you for that, Claudette.
Thank you, Claudette. My understanding is that if you had town engineering staff, you can complete grant applications using their license and submitting engineering information. I think that because Larry was not in a situation where his liability insurance was being supported by the town, that was precisely one of those instances where he wasn't willing to use his license on behalf of the town. And so we did use contracted engineers for that work. I think it's also pretty customary in the grant world to recognize that you don't have the labor force on any level. So, you know, the whole thing is structured using a consulting engineering firm.
So my question now sorry, Claudia, did that help or just thicken the plot for you?
Well, I don't know, because I seem to remember that, and I have no idea if an engineer who's licensed in one state needs to be licensed in another state, or if it's just a universal license. But I seem to recall comments made by Herb that said, well, because Larry was licensed in New Hampshire, the work that he couldn't do the work in Vermont. And maybe I don't know if I'm not correct in that remembrance, but you know, whatever, if we hire an engineer, I agree we should pay the insurance. That's number one. But I'm also willing to expand the pool to non-engineers for sure. Does that help?
Yes, and so I'll take Marcia's point, and then I'm going to ask Rod if he has enough from us to do something with the information. Okay, so go ahead, Marcia.
I just looked it up and it says that they're licensed at the state and territory level. So I think
I wish you could see, sorry to interrupt, I wish you could see Rod in this meeting, because his expressions and his nodding would probably help this process, but you can't, so sorry. Go ahead, Marcia.
So I guess my question would be, you know, cost benefit analysis. Are we using one enough that it pays to just have one on staff? We can't have one of everything on staff, but if this is something that's important, then maybe we need it because it would save us money. And if that's not the case, then, you know, don't advertise for an engineer. So I think we need to have maybe a bit of data that says we use one this many times a year, or we could use one, or we have had to contract out for one, because it looks like we've been wasting money by having hired an engineer and then used contracted help when we needed to have an engineer. And that's just totally wasteful.
Yeah, that's really, I think it's really smart, Marcia. And Rod is nodding. So do any of the board members have any other comments, or I'm going to ask Rod if he feels like, or let me ask, what is it that we wish, oh God, the lights flash. What is it that we wish for Rod to do with our feedback? Go ahead, Marcia.
I wish he would do an analysis to figure out how many times a year we have had to use an engineer, and then, you know, see if that is offset by having one on staff.
Okay. Any other board members have agreed with that or any other suggestions? And then I'll turn to Rob. Good, Mary.
I think I probably wouldn't need that explicit analysis that Marcia is calling for. And also thinking about the projects, for instance, the engineering that was done for the Beaver Meadows sidewalk, it seemed as though it wasn't one engineer, you know, it was several. It seemed like it had to be a group effort to have a person who's an engineer, who's your Department of Public Works director with the work that goes into that, and then expect that one person to do preparation for a large project seems to me unreasonable. So it might have been good to have a professional engineer just to look everything over in town, but it may have been maybe just not the best move on Herb's part, let's just say that, to go in that direction. It might have sounded better than it was in actuality.
Thanks, Mary. So Claudette, I'm looking, can you sort of affirm or offer some stuff, some feedback to Marcia's point and then any other direction?
Yeah, I don't know where the analysis, I guess I would even go further back from that. And in that, if, to Mary's point, having an engineer, will the time that is in, as a DPW director, will the time that that director is committed to reviewing plans really take away from the day-to-day operation that is needed at DPW? And so we also pay Two Rivers for a lot of engineering work, and that would be a duplication. So I guess I'm not sure where I don't know.
So let me offer that I think some level of, you know, we can call it analysis or some level of I think we should have some more information that actually engages with the spirit of this suggestion. And so I think Marcia called that an analysis. And so to the extent that we have actual examples to support this idea, like I want that. So.
My one concern, I appreciate the interest and I think it's something that I can spend some time looking at. I'm not sure when, but I can. I think there's a couple of comments or sort of little asterisks I want to add here. I think the quality of the data is going to be pretty, you know, rough. I wouldn't sort of spend serious money on the basis of the data that I'm going to drag up. And then very quickly, okay, we interviewed 4 candidates 2 weeks ago. We have a situation where we have somebody acting in the role of DPW director. It's late summer, things are fairly stable. We seem to have dodged a couple of serious bullets with storms, but we're moving towards winter. I'm concerned that the board needs to move quickly to find a new DPW director in a very tight market. I have to say that our friends and colleagues across the northern New England and upstate New York are screaming and losing good workers to the private sector and under the current conditions with substantial sign-up bonuses and other benefits that completely overwhelm the municipal ability to pay. And that there are vacancies all over the public works departments that are in the Upper Valley. So what I'm trying to point out here, I guess, is that the labor market's very tight and we need to move quickly because I fear that we don't want to be in a situation in the fall and winter when we don't have a DPW director. So I appreciate the interest in the analysis, but I'm concerned that we should be back out there advertising as soon as possible.
So Rod, is there a way to re-advertise as soon as possible without addressing the essential questions that have been brought before us?
Masha has a hand up,
Yes,
but I think very quickly, we could de-emphasize the importance of having a PE. And then address that question of how to access a PE for the purposes that we need one for later, and then try and just find a solid public works director. Anyway.
I appreciate that. Go ahead, Marcia.
Maybe just cut to the chase and ask Fielding to come up with the amount of money that we've spent on contracting out for an engineer over the last 5 years. That can't take too much time.
I don't think so, but I'm not sure how much that's going to tell you in a certain kind of way, Masha. I think that's the point that I'm trying to convey. But
Well, I mean, if it's $20,000, then I think we don't need an engineer.
Yeah.
If it's $100,000, we need an engineer.
Yeah, so I think, so go ahead, Claudette, and then I think we're getting to the same place.
Yeah, and just to point out, it's going to depend on what your projects are year by year. So it's not going to be apples to apples comparison.
Right.
That's the other problem.
Right.
So, 1 year you might have a lot of projects, then you need a lot of engineering work, and the next year you might not. So
2017, there was a huge storm. All of a sudden, we need to rebuild stuff. We had engineering bills. We were paying engineers all over the place, a lot, but it was very specific, right? Then 2019 and 2020, quiet years, don't use engineers. It's more to the point that we probably don't need one full-time, a full-time.
So can we amend the advertising to say
Yes.
engineering degree or comparable practical, whatever the language would be?
Yep. So that was Rod's suggestion. I don't know if we had stepped away for a little bit, but yes, that's where we got to.
So that would be my suggestion.
Okay, and then I do support finding some examples, whether that's data gathering, as Marcia has outlined. So go ahead, Mary.
I'd just like to hear what Rob Gear thinks.
Yeah, thank you. I love all of the collaboration. Go ahead, Rob. Please.
Yeah,
You've been put on the spot.
Yeah, I think, if I look at it and just guess at what happened, I think Larry was looking for an end of career job to fill out a few years. He wasn't being told that his engineering degree was required, but it was thought of as a benefit to hiring him. And I don't think there probably would have been any expectation that he would use it any differently than just normal experience in performing his job. And it's silly to think that we're going to find that kind of a candidate in the pool right away. What we need is a good DPW manager and director, and whatever experience or extra degrees they have they're just bonuses, and maybe we have to pay them somewhat for that ability.
Okay. Go ahead, Marcia, and then I'm going to ask for final comment on this.
I was just going to say that the reference to 2017 is, I think, important, because if we had to have a lot of engineers around, then it wouldn't have done any good if we had one engineer on staff. So, maybe just advertise and see what we get. But if we hire somebody who is qualified, then I think we have to be prepared to say, well, we either are or we aren't going to pay the insurance so that you can act as a licensed engineer. And presumably, because of qualifications, that has a bearing on the amount of salary the person gets.
And the job description.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so just by consensus, what I'm hearing is that Rod is going to, or the office is going to do another job search, and we're going to de-emphasize the professional engineering background in that job description. And then meanwhile, we hope to gain some insight about how much engineering services are actually utilized by the town. Is that where we are? Okay, I'm seeing some hands. Rod, does that help? Okay. We'll move on then. But thanks, everyone. I really, that was really helpful. Okay, so I think it makes sense for the next agenda item. It says expectations for budgeting process. I think given sort of where we are with our town staffing, I think it's really important that we as a board do our very best as early as possible to explain our expectations for budgeting, particularly capital, you know, for going into budget season. So I don't have a deliverable that I want to get us to by the end of this conversation, but I do think it will be informative to start discussing it. So did anyone have any thoughts when they when this was put on the agenda and we all agreed to do so? I saw Mary and then Marcia.
I just like to look into whether we've been doing an adequate job with our designated fund levels and make sure that, or try to do a good job of paying for the capital decisions that have been made in the past, that we're not getting behind in any areas. So that's my main thing. Because we did cut back when the flooding happened, which I was kind of nervous about at the time. And then, you know, I think the way that costs go up of everything, health insurance and, you know, the consumer price index and everything, there's going to be an increase anyway. And then if you cut your designated funds and don't replenish them, then suddenly you might have to take a big leap to get them back in line. So I'm concerned about that sort of thing.
Okay. Marcia, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I'm concerned about finishing our master financial policies and especially the capital budget one, because I think, you know, Rod had it on his plan to talk to the new financial director about that, the developing a capital improvement plan. And I think it all flows from that and we need to finish it.
Okay. Claudette, because I haven't seen her hand, and then back to Mary.
Yeah, I guess my concerns, what is out there as an existing capital budget and plan, is not sufficient for what we need to discuss. And I knowing that we have ARPA funds in the mix, might make things a little bit easier, but we as a board never did discuss any kind of prioritization or we never had any discussion about that capital budget and plan. I don't believe we ever received an inventory of our capital assets. So those are things that I think are critical for us. We had a very good plan from the fire department for vehicle replacement. It almost feels to me like we're going to be starting back to at square one for a capital budget and plan. The operational budget, you know, it's the way we finance designated funds kind of meshes the two plans together in a way that is probably not really a great idea.
Mhm.
So, but, so I, I don't know if there's a way that we can address the capital budget and plan that makes a lot of sense, or if we should just really pare it down to vehicle replacement plans, financing plans, and or other major capital projects like the sidewalk. So I think we really clearly need some help here. Whether or not that would be delivered with an interim town manager who's like, no offense to Rod, I thank you, Rod, for stepping up, but I don't think this is in your wheelhouse. It may be, and maybe you can provide us with some great guidance, but if not, is there a way that maybe VLCT can connect us with a resource that could really help us develop a real capital budget and plan?
Okay. Mary, your hand was up, and then Marcia.
I just also built what Marcia said kind of about unfinished business. So also our debt management plan, we left up in the air. So we couldn't figure out what would be an appropriate amount of debt. The ARPA funds mean that maybe we wouldn't have much debt, but also I don't think we don't really have a strategic plan. I don't think we really have a handle on, the condition and the appropriateness of the structures that we have now and their functions. And we have a lot of relics, I would call them relics, just from the past. And I don't mean to be insulting, but I think the fire district was kind of put together in an era where I think the village was thinking about improvements, but the outlying areas were not involved in that. So it kind of became its own entity. There are a lot of aspects like that where it kind of takes a larger global view. And then we also just have the day-to-day realities of paying for everything and increases. So we could use a lot of guidance. I really agree with Claudette on that, but it might be in several different areas. It might be strategic planning, capital planning, and budgeting and policy. Like all those areas really kind of need a big redesign. And I don't know how you get advice on that, but I think to do a really good job, I think we need to be active in all of those areas and informed in all of those areas. Wow.
I have a couple of things I want to point out, but Marcia had her hand up. Go ahead, Marcia.
I think we might shortcut the process if we just got a list of what's insured to start with, and then take that list and just do the hard work of have a special meeting where we sit down and make an Excel spreadsheet where we say, these are all the things that are insured for this amount, and then turn to the departments and say, all right, when do you, just tell us, when is this one going to be dead? When are we going to need whatever? And then we also have to step back and say, what is it that we think is a priority for the town? And that would include things like sidewalks and, whatever else people think is a priority, and then put that on a list. But I think that sort of functional list has to be used in conjunction with a really strong capital budget plan, which we don't have, or policy. And so I think we need to basically schedule a special meeting and have those things at our fingertips. Maybe one meeting to finish these financial policies, the debt policy, as Mary says, as well as the capital budget one, and then another meeting to just sit down and make an Excel spreadsheet and then tell the departments what's missing.
Right. So thank you, Marcia. And so that really so what I will say is that I think what you're saying is we should begin to talk about capital budgeting, which quite frankly, like, you know, in fairness to her, was one of the things he consistently reiterated to us. We should just begin the process by talking, right? And I think you're saying that now. And the other thing, in terms of asset inventory and your point about sort of, you know, what is insured, right? Herb sent me a cacophony of documents. And the hope was that I would take all of these, you know, unsearchable PDFs, essentially, and I would put them in a Trello board, and that Trello board would save us, right? And so, or provide sort of the high level or point of view where we could begin to sort of go through a decision-making process. And so I have those materials, and I'm more than halfway, quite frankly, through that course. And so, you know, that may or may inform a conversation where we just begin to talk about it. You know, it is September, and I worry about, you know, the trees as opposed to the forest. And so, like, the policy is a forest question. We can get to work on that. But I do wonder if it makes sense to sort of begin with like a high level presentation from departments, who may be maybe more along in the process than others. We've heard in the town manager report from fire, police, and the listers are really ready, right? And a lot of what they do is vehicle, right? Such as Claudette's point about maybe we make progress by affirming replacement schedules, right? And then when you affirm a replacement schedule, you decide on how much designated funds need to be raised, right, to support those proposals. And then we can sort of go from there, right? So it's like, we know that we need to raise this much from designated funds with these cars that we want to buy by virtue of affirming a life cycle or a replacement schedule plan. So that's sort of what I'm thinking. Maybe it's just sort of a summary of what everyone has said. The only other point that I want to make is the school actually does a really good job at the beginning of their budget process, sort of anticipating sort of the possible increases in certain areas for the budget review and sort of and other priorities, right? So one of the things I'm thinking of is we can predict CPI in a practical way. We can predict rising health insurance costs. We can predict these obligations relating to personnel, of which makes up a large portion of the budget. And we can understand, perhaps with our assistance of the new finance director, what these increases are and have a little bit of analysis to say, like, look, before you do anything else, you're looking at a 3.5 increase on operating. And that should inform what you're doing. So for me, I have stepped back from them, but I think there's some high level work we can do, and while we're vigilant about getting too into the weeds, I don't want to talk about every wheel on every car. I can't personally. Any other comments about Marcia?
Well, I understand. I don't want to talk about all the wheels either. I just figured that having the, knowing what we have insured would give us a better idea. The other thing that I don't think anybody ever really talks about is the condition of Tracy Hall. I don't know what, the roof doesn't look so good. And I don't think that the air quality is very good. So I think, I'd like to see that somehow factored in.
Right. Claudette and then Mary, and then different public comments.
Go to Mary. I forgot what I was going to say.
No, hold on, you Claudette. No, okay, go ahead, Mary.
Go, Roger. Okay.
You have your hand up?
Okay, shall I speak?
Please.
In terms of Tracy Hall, it's not only condition, it's function. For instance, if we did strategic planning, we might decide that maybe a higher purpose for Tracy Hall is a quite energy efficient community center. Like we might reevaluate the functions of it and renovate the inside, try to keep the exterior historic, but do something different on the inside, maybe relocate a few of the town offices. But that kind of thinking is more, you know, that's more, I think, strategic planning. And it's not just saying, oh, you know, nobody can, in Tracy Hall can breathe very well, which might be the exact reality, but it's also, you know, thinking a little bit more broadly about how our assets are used and what their functions are.
Right, great plan.
Yeah, I remembered what I was going to say. And funding sources. You know, it's not just, there's loans, there's bonds, there's purchase outright, there are municipal leases, which I don't believe we've ever had any discussion about, where if you lease a piece of equipment, it's yours at the end of the lease and not returned. That's never been in our discussion that I recall. So, you know, I think we as a board really need to determine what it is that we believe need to be included in our capital budget and plan. Vehicle replacements, infrastructure maintenance, possibly sidewalk. Prioritize right, but that doesn't seem to, you have right, that could be the 5-year piece, but you know, we need to and then we need to prioritize them, and then we need to figure out cost or funding mechanisms.
Yeah.
So all of that, and yeah, so essentially we are going to be starting from scratch, I believe.
Okay, and then I have, does anyone have further comments? And I have one more point to make. So the only thing I would say is this agenda item says, board will discuss expectations for budgeting, particularly capital budgeting, in the context of staff shortages, right? So there is a sort of polemic, right, that like brought us to this discussion, and I think we are maybe how do we adjust, right, for the context that we find ourselves in, or do we not? Is really my question.
Well, that gets to my question. Can VLCT, or is there somebody we can look to for essentially the expertise to walk us through this, or to help us through this?
Okay. Go ahead, Mary, and then Marcia.
Maybe we'd be able to do a kind of a visioning process, but not actually, you know, make some moves, and think that this year with the staff shortages, we have to be very minimalist in what we actually do. But that shouldn't prevent us from thinking about the future and thinking about sort of broader issues about the town. I don't think those are mutually exclusive.
Okay. Marcia?
I tend to go back to statute, and I think we're only supposed to do basically what we've asked money for particular things to do. And so it seems to me like we have money available and it's for certain things, and some of it's discretionary. So we should look at what's available and what needs to be done, and then make a decision based on priorities. And what we're almost talking about here is more of a long-term process, which I don't think maybe needs to be done in October or November, but we do have to be thinking about what is it that we want money for, that we're going to want to be putting on the warrant, so that we have designated funds approved that we can then spend based on the priorities we've decided.
Right.
So the only, okay, go ahead, Claire.
No, it just gets, but it gets to my point of funding sources. We definitely, you know, if there are so many options for funding, but I know I'm getting into the weeds and Roger wants to lift us above the weeds.
The one thing I would suggest, and that I think I hear more strongly from Marcia than the rest of y'all, is I think we need to understand what our obligations are, which is more of an operating budget question, but we need to know what our obligations are. We need to make sure that, and how they're increasing, for how they're projected to increase. And then we need to understand what monies need to be raised, right? And how that affects the tax rate accordingly in order to meet these obligations. Then I think from there, my thinking is we'll quickly realize that with shortage of staff and a global pandemic, that there'll be a nominal amount of space left for special projects. And so we may wish to think about the next 2.5 years rather than a full 5-year plan. That's all I'll say. So I think what I would like to do, and then I will take public comment and so on if that's okay, is if anybody likes any of that. I only saw Marcia nodding.
Well,
go ahead, Mary.
Well, I think we can only practically pay for what we can pay for. So we can be practical about that and try to maybe have some creative financing, as Claudette says, or look into things like leasing. For instance, leasing maybe that would also give us the flexibility on buying vehicles that are more energy efficient. If we could lease them and, if there's an improvement, we let go of one lease and start another, that sort of thing. So I think that sort of dealing with the practical matters are what are our costs? What are our what's the condition of our assets? How can we keep up with our designated funds or other means of financing? That's pretty obvious, and I think we can do that. And we might do it more minimally since we are short-staffed. We can't be hugely ambitious about it, but I still think for the future, things could open up. We have the ARPA funds. We will get staff. I have confidence we will get, a town manager, a DPW director will put things in place. And I think that in the future, there could be some changes that could be made. So I don't, it's almost like you have to be practical, but I don't think it's a necessity to stop thinking about what would be good long-term planning for our town. What would be a benefit for the future, including things like sidewalks, including things like a possible community center. So I don't know.
Okay, so I'm going to take the public comments and I'm going to move on just because we're over time, and I think we've had a good discussion. And Rod was taking notes, so perhaps he can reflect and help us a little in this interim period. Okay, Cheryl, you were first, and then I'll take Andy here, and then we're going to move on. Okay.
Thank you, Cheryl Lindbergh, 59 Koch Road. A couple of thoughts. I know when Neil Fulton was town manager, we did do some leasing, and I think we did leasing that we didn't buy at the end. I think we leased to let it go. I'm not 100% sure, but there is that option, and I don't think leasing has to go through the same process that you have to go through when you want to borrow. I also want you to understand that while VLCT is a great organization and all, there are other organizations and associations that I'm familiar with, like Vermont Government Finance Officers Association and the New England States GFOA and the National GFOA. And there are people that I can get connected to come to a meeting and talk with you about budgeting if that is something you would be interested in. Those connections are available. They're always willing to help municipalities. We had a capital budgeting workshop last year, and there are some great work that gets done in Vermont by finance directors and towns that are right in our own state, and I know that they would lend a hand. I can forward you some PowerPoints that you could look at. So, I think what you're talking about, the process you're talking about is all great. And I think getting the inventory of assets and all is very smart. So I just want to offer that assistance to sending you all some PowerPoints and, the budgeting practices that GFOA wants you to use to make a great budget for your town. So.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. I think we certainly welcome that as a welcome forwarding materials as a start for sure. I think that'll be helpful. So thank you.
I like that.
Yes. Go ahead, Andy Shear.
Hi, Andy Shear, 23 Hazen Street. I do appreciate this discussion, and as a member of the public, I guess it strikes me that there's going to be always the public wanting to bring forth ideas and things and priorities. And I'm wondering, is there a way that the public, could see this document if you have it once it's created, or, figure out the process? Because you're always going to be hit with people saying, oh, we got to get the sidewalk. Oh, we got to get the septic system on the school figured out. Just figuring out a way to engage with the public and let them be sort of a part of the process, because they're always going to be bringing forth ideas. I mean, they're your kind of feelers out in the world, out in the town, to sort of identify what some of those capital projects might be. And so, and then sort of engaging them and enlisting them and to help with that process, so, is it time to apply for a sidewalk? I have no idea. Who knows? Can the town do it? I don't know. Like, we're, this group I'm with, quite frankly, we're talking about, applying for a warrant. Is that a good idea right now, or for an article for next March? I don't know. Is it gonna put the town in a difficult position? Is it gonna, hit us back in the face? Like, I think it helps everyone to sort of open up those lines of communication and figure out like how to best discuss some of these large capital things. So anyway, but I do appreciate this discussion. Thank you.
Yes, thanks so much, Andy. I think what you're saying is there should be a process, and that process should be clear and communicated to the public, right? And I think we don't necessarily have all of that, is I think what we're talking about right now. So any other board members want to reflect on Andy's points? I think that's worth chatting about a little bit, and then we'll move on. Go ahead, Marcia.
I keep thinking about Dan Frazier's organization for, having people in different areas of town with a little captain or whatever. I mean, I just think if that's set up, why can't we use some of that to feed us information, to just ask people, can you just ask your neighbors, what's important to you? And I think that kind of feedback would be important to hear.
Thank you, Marcia. Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna see Andy's hand. Andy, really quickly, if I may ask that, go ahead.
Super fast. Public radio, every once in a while, they will just have an open air thing, and people just call in and just tell them topics that they want them to cover on their public radio shows. So you could just have an open thing where you say, all right, we're just taking ideas from the town, submit your ideas between this date and this date. And, you could, you're not commenting on it, you're just receiving. So it's just an open forum for people to be heard, and you can do that. So anyway, thank you.
Thanks so much, Andy. Okay, Peter, go ahead. And then we are moving on. I mean it.
Thanks, Roger. I know it's late, but with respect to what Marcia and Andy are talking about, just want to remind everybody that that our group has put in 3 years. We did a town survey that was open to everybody in town. We had a petition with over 200 signatures. So we've been doing a lot of the work that you guys are talking about. already. And so we just would appreciate if that would be a part of the conversation. Not only that, but multiple, at least 2 votes from the select board in favor of moving forward with completing the loop. So just want to put it out there that this isn't, we're happy to keep going, and we will, as Andy's suggesting, but we also are on record with a great deal of support. And I thank you guys for listening tonight. Thanks.
Here. Okay, I'm gonna move us on. Is that okay, folks? All right. So we have future agenda items. I think this was really just to hold space and to acknowledge that sometimes we can have more complex discussions when we talk about them at the end of the meeting. But the reason why we do agenda setting as allowable under OML is because it always comes at the end of the meeting and it's always late. So we can have a discussion on this. I also am happy to table it because we have 2 more big items to discuss as well. So go ahead. What do folks think? Good, Marcia.
Master financial plan, please.
Okay, great. Anything else? I think we can take it over email. I just wanted to, as I said, if there was complex conversation that needed to happen, then it was on the agenda. Okay. We'll move on then. The proposed gift to the Gerard Fund. Perhaps the revised gift policy is a future agenda item, but in the meantime, can we, under the terms of our current adopted policy in place, this is sort of done in addition to the standards that are put in the policy. Why don't we begin with a motion?
I move to accept a gift of $2,000 to the John Gerard Fund.
Is there a second? Seconded by Claudette. Any discussion?
I'm sorry. Was that in the packet or was?
Yes, it was on the agenda for number 11, and then it's on the sheet 11. Wasn't really.
I mean, there was nothing in the packet itself about information about this gift.
I don't think so.
There is no supporting documentation.
I'm sorry?
There is no supporting documentation. Bree Swenson is in the room, so we could hear her speak to it if that would address your question.
It might, but I can't understand you.
Yeah, you got to speak into the microphone, please.
Yes, well, the microphone is like a while away. You don't have the benefit of seeing the set. So what I was saying was Bree Swenson is here. She could briefly speak to it, but if that helps. Okay, Bree, go ahead.
Okay, it's a $2,000 gift to the John Gerard Fund, which has been given every year since the fund has been established. It's a directed fund through Fidelity, given in honor of John Gerard. Again, by this directed fund every year. They've given their annual gift. It's up for acceptance. There is a question from Kathy Gerard that she wanted me to ask why the select board has to approve funds going into her family's memorial fund. So I am obligated to just ask that because she's asked me to ask that.
And Bree, just for curiosity, what was your answer to the?
I did not answer it. I just found that email when I went upstairs.
Okay.
Literally.
Great. So would board members like to maybe address that question just for the?
Say that question again.
I'll actually, can I read her email?
Sure.
She says, I'm still puzzled as to why the select board needs to get involved with gifts to the Gerard Fund. They weren't involved when the fund was originally set up. Could you ask for clarification on this tonight? And what exactly does the policy say about gifts to various departments of the town as opposed to the general fund? As far as I know, the select board does not have any jurisdiction over this funds, correct or not. So just a question from the Gerard family who set up a memorial fund for their husband
Very much.
and father.
And Cheryl can probably answer this too, but it seems to me this is being given to the town and administered by the town, ergo we're responsible for knowing how it's spent. It's really a safeguard to make sure that monies are spent wisely, or, you know, they're not just given and lost.
Right, I think it should be seen as procedural and administrative, or could be seen. Cheryl, would you like to make a comment?
Cheryl Lindbergh, yeah, Marcia sort of said the words that, you know, this money is under the tax ID of the town of Norwich. It is under the legislative responsibility of the select board. And again, if you went back to John Gerard's obituary, there was a message about what the funds would be used for. And that was, you know, the reason for the fund to be established, but I'm not always sure that that's what the money has been spent on. So again, getting back to an earlier discussion, designated funds, what's their purpose? What are they supposed to be used for? And being
So the
under the
Gerard
town.
Fund actually has a mission, Cheryl, and it's
Can
to do the
Cheryl
most
finish
good
her-
for the
can Cheryl
most
finish her
people,
comment?
and it
Great,
actually
I'm
is
sorry.
administered by the
I'm
town.
sorry, Grace, can Cheryl finish her comment and then?
Go right ahead.
Go ahead, Cheryl.
I'm not gonna, I'm done.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. Bree, go ahead. Would you like?
So the question wasn't whether it's being administered correctly, which I strongly believe it is. It's being overseen by his wife, Kathy Gerard, and the family who oversees every gift that's given. And it is in the spirit of the way he conducted activity in this town. I strongly believe in that, and I think a lot of people do. Kathy's only question was why the select board is approving the gifts, which I think was answered very well. And that was her only question, not how her husband's memorial fund is being administered.
Yeah, I
Thank you, Marcia.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Great, thank you. So can we, so can I call the question? Okay, all in favor of accepting this gift with thanks, of course, to the donor and the legacy of this fund, right? So all in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you. All right, so next.
Oh, Roger, I just clearly, Mrs. Gerard needs a response to her email. Who will be responsible for that? Will it be Bree?
I'm happy to do that.
Rod has just volunteered to provide a response acknowledging receipt and thanking her for her message. How's that?
And answering her question about why the select board is now involved when seemingly they weren't in the past.
Yes, I think, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. I think that's important. Okay, so next we added an agenda item for an interim town manager contract discussion, and so it's an executive session item, and so I'm going to make the motion. This will be a two-part motion. So let me just get set up, okay, for that. Okay. So I move to find that premature general public knowledge would clearly place the town at a substantial disadvantage in its contract negotiations with the interim town manager by disclosing the proposed terms of his employment and compensation before the board has had an opportunity to privately consider and discuss the same. Is there a second?
I second it.
Okay. We're going to vote. All in favor? Okay, thank you. I move to enter executive session to consider contract. Is there a second?
I second.
All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you. I'm going to pause the recording and put folks in the waiting room. Go another area.
I move to enter public session. Am I too soon?
I think you're too soon. I don't.
Sounds good.
Are we good?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, is there a motion to, go ahead.
I move to enter public session.
Second.
Okay, seconded by Mary. All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay. I believe there is an action that we would like to take in public.
I'll wing it if I'll try. I move to authorize the select board chair to
Fine.
to write
Fine.
to sign the letter of intent with our interim town manager.
For counter signature.
So moved. Yeah.
Okay.
I didn't say it right.
So Miranda's asking, because she's taking notes, well, can you just repeat your motion a little bit for us, Claudette?
I move to authorize the select board chair to sign a letter of agreement with our interim town manager.
Sign the agreement.
And to perhaps for counter signature.
For counter signature by our interim town manager.
Okay. Is that clear? Do you have, Miranda, can you read back the motion for us? Just to make sure you have it.
Yes. Okay. Brochure moved to authorize the select board chair to sign the agreement with our interim town manager for counter signature by the interim town manager.
Okay.
That doesn't sound right.
It sounds ratty.
Yeah.
Would you
I withdraw that motion. Hold on.
Okay.
Maybe just write it out or something.
That's what I'm gonna do right now.
Hard, so late.
Okay, let me try this one. I move to authorize the select board chair to present a letter of agreement to the interim town manager with an effective date of August 31st, 2021. That work?
August 31st, did you say?
Or September 1st, sorry.
Okay.
For counter signature by the proposed employee.
I unfortunately can't assist because I would be authorizing myself. So
Good.
So Miranda, can you read that back to us so we see where we are?
Yes, brochure moved to authorize the select board chair to present a letter of agreement to the interim town manager effective September 1st, 2021 for counter signature by the interim town manager.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Made by Claudette, seconded by Rob.
I didn't hear that amendment.
Okay, brochure moved to authorize the select board chair to present a letter of agreement to the interim town manager effective September 1st, 2021 for counter signature by the interim town manager.
Okay, I'm good with that.
Okay, and we had a second by Rob. So any further discussion on this matter?
Does the letter say August 31 or September 1?
This is August 31.
So I would propose to change the date to August 31, 2021.
Rob has to second.
I would propose seconding the amended.
So the amendment to reflect the letter as presented in our meeting or in our executive session. Okay. Any further discussion? Okay. All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you. Is there a motion to adjourn?
No, I'm having so much fun.
I move to adjourn.
A second.
Okay, thank you. And we'll in the discussion period, I'll say we'll see you tomorrow at 5:30 for our special meeting. Okay.
Yes, vote though.
Okay, all in favor, please. All in favor? Yes. Okay. Good night with appreciation.
Good night.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.